Chapter 37-37. Chapter 37-32. Chapter 37-32. Return to the Underworld, 9 Life Veins? Rui Qinyu and Cher's expressions changed when they heard Devil's Knight's words. They were stunned. They did not know what a lifeline was, nor did they know what it meant to have 9 lifelines. 9 life veins. At the same time, the Fat Cat and the Ghost Emperor's voices rang out at the same time, but they were filled with shock and horror. Of course, the two of them knew about life veins, and they understood what 9 life veins meant. This was the reason why they were so terrified. Only a martial artist with a martial Dao fate would have a lifeline. Among the warriors in the world, there were very few people who had a martial Dao lifeline. Even if they had a martial Dao life chart, there were very few people who could nurture a lifeline. Among the warriors with life meridians, those who had 2 or more life meridians were considered geniuses. Those who had more than 5 life veins were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns. 9 life veins. That was almost a legendary existence. The Ghost Emperor and the Fat Cat, one was an old monster that had lived for millions of years, while the other was a freak with inherited memories. However, the two of them had only seen one martial artist with 9 life veins, and that was Nie Tian. Finding a person with 9 life veins was harder than finding a needle in a haystack. To make matters worse, according to Devil's Knight, even the fiend god nascent embryo could only sustain Nie Tian's soul for a day. One day later, Nie Tian's divine soul would dissipate. In other words, if he couldn't find someone with 9 lifelines within a day, Nie Tian would definitely die. Where are the people of the 9 lifelines? Rui Qinyu had no idea how difficult this task was, so she asked Devil's Knight directly. I don't know, Devil's Knight said gloomily. At that moment, Fat Cat suddenly thought of something. She stared at Devil's Knight and shouted, Aren't you the one with 9 life veins? He now understood that Devil's Knight was the dark side of Nie Tian. Since Devil's Knight had inherited so much power from Nie Tian, he naturally inherited the power of the martial Dao life providence. Just like Nie Tian, Devil's Knight was also a person with 9 vital veins. I can't. Devil's Knight shook his head and said, My injuries are too severe now. Furthermore, my power contains the aura of the god-demon inverse mark. Once it is injected into Nie Tian's body, not only will it not be able to activate his martial body, but it will also activate the power of the divine demon inverse inscription in his body, causing his martial body to instantly collapse. The Fat Cat and the Ghost Emperor were both stunned and speechless. They knew that Devil's Knight wasn't lying. Moreover, Nie Tian only had 1 day. He couldn't wait. At that moment, Rui Qinyu's eyes were cold and murderous. She stared at Devil's Knight cold and said, If you can't save Nie Tian, you will be buried with him. I can temporarily seal his divine soul and let it exist in the godfiend origin embryo for about 7 days. Devil's Knight's eyes flickered and he said, If you can't find someone with 9 vital veins in 7 days, then there's nothing I can do. He didn't want to save Nie Tian, but he wanted to live. From the looks of Rui Qinyu and Cher, if Nie Tian died, they would definitely not allow Devil's Knight to live. Do it now. Rui Qinyu's eyes were filled with murderous intent and she said cold. I'll help Nie Tian maintain his divine soul. You must promise not to kill me. Devil's Knight's eyes flickered and he said in a deep voice. Okay. Before Rui Qinyu could speak, Cher replied. This was not the time to negotiate with Devil's Knight. Any delay would put Nie Tian in more danger. As for Devil's Knight's life, he could be kept alive. If Nie Tian survived, he would naturally come to kill him. If Nie Tian died, Cher would definitely not let Devil's Knight live. Okay. Devil's Knight glanced at Rui Qinyu and finally nodded. Then, he walked forward and released a gust of devil chi. It formed a rune in the air and enveloped Nie Tian. Ghost Emperor and Fat Cat were sensing the changes in the aura to make sure that Devil's Knight did not play any trick. After a while, the rune was imprinted on Nie Tian's chest. Like a seal, it restrained the active divine soul in the divine demon embryo. Okay. Fat Cat made sure that Nietion's divine soul was much more stable in the divine demon embryo. Then, she nodded. Next, let's see if you can find someone with 9 vital meridians within 7 days. Devil's Knight let out a long breath and said in a deep voice, "One more thing. After you're done, we'll leave." Fat Cat looked cold at Devil's Knight and said. Then, the 9 superbs opened again and Lan Zhuiying walked out. Nietion. As soon as Lan Zhuiying came out, she saw Nietion lying on the ground. Her pretty face changed and she screamed. "Nietion is not dead yet," Fat Cat said in a deep voice and said to Devil's Knight, "Remove the bliss imprint in her body." Ghost Emperor had already told Fat Cat about Lan Zhuiying. One of the reasons why Nietion participated in the Bloody Soul Path was to see the Blood Soul Ancestor and remove the bliss imprint in Lan Zhuiying's body. Now that the Blood Soul Ancestor was dead and Devil's Knight had fused with the Three Souls' mysterious heart, he could only remove the bliss imprint. Devil's Knight's eyes narrowed and his divine sense swept through Lan Zhuiying. He nodded and said, "Let her stay here. I'll help her remove the bliss imprint after I recover." "I won't let you off if you dare to hurt her." Cher's beautiful eyes sank and said cold. Devil's Knight smiled and said, "Don't worry, I, Devil's Knight, am a man of my words. I'll let her go after I remove the bliss imprint." Okay. Fat Cat nodded and said nothing else, preparing to leave immediately. Lan Zhuiying didn't want to stay here, but she didn't want to be a burden to everyone, especially under such circumstances. Then, Devil's Knight and Fat Cat and the others opened the exit of the Bloody Soul Path and let them go. Everyone left the Bloody Soul Path with Nietion and immediately returned to the Yin City. Ghost Emperor felt that returning to the Yin City at this time was the best choice. The Black Emperor was in the Yin City, and his identity was the High Priest of the Fengtian Fate Sect. The Fengtian Fate Sect was a very special sect, and all the cultivators cultivated the martial Tao fate chart. If there was someone in this world who had the 9 paths, then the Black Emperor would definitely know. Half a day later, Fat Cat and the others returned to the Yin City and directly went to the Black Martial Hall. "Who are you people?" Outside the Black Martial Hall, Song Nanyu saw Fat Cat, Rui Qinyu, Cher, and the others. He didn't know them, so he asked coldly with a gloomy expression, "We want to see the Black Emperor." Fat Cat didn't waste any time and directly brought Nietion out from the 9 extremities. Chapter 37-38. Chapter 37-33. Chapter 37-33 Feng Tian Hun Schooling City, Dark Martial Hall. The Black Emperor, Meng Wu, stood in the hall with an extremely gloomy expression. His gaze was cold and solemn, and he was like a confined wild beast that would explode in the next moment. Fat Cat and the others stood behind the Black Monarch, their expressions ugly as well. At this point, the Black Emperor already knew the whole story. He hadn't expected that Nietion's path of blood and soul would end up like this. Nietion didn't die at the hands of Ancestor Blood Soul. Instead, he almost died at the hands of himself. The Black Emperor's face was filled with cold killing intent, and he did not speak for a long time, as if he was thinking about something. "Lord Onyx Emperor, do you know where in this world there are people with 9 life veins?" Rui Qinyu couldn't help but step forward and ask. The Black Emperor's face darkened. He glanced at Rui Qinyu coldly but did not say a word. "Lord Black Emperor, could you please tell us?" Cher could not help but step forward and ask solemnly. From Black Emperor's reaction, he should know about martial artists with 9 lifelines. However, for some reason, he was unwilling to say it. Black Emperor turned to look at Cher, but he still didn't say anything. "Dark Emperor, you are the High Priest of the Beacon Heaven Fate Sect. You exist to protect the Beacon Emperor." Fat Cat's gaze darkened and she said, "Nietion is the Beacon Emperor. Are you going to watch him die?" When the Black Emperor heard the Fat Cat's words, his eyes widened and his expression changed. This emperor does know a person who has 9 lifelines. After a long time, the Black Emperor finally spoke. However, his expression was very gloomy. His eyes shone with a strange light as if he was recalling many things. Who is that person? Rui Qianyu and Cher's expressions changed at the same time, and they asked in unison. Onyx glanced at Rui Qianyu and Cher with a strange look. Instead of answering directly, he asked, "What price are you willing to pay to save Lord Beacon Emperor?" "Any price." Rui Qianyu's eyes trembled and she said directly, "At all costs." Cher's pupils shrank as she blurted out, "As long as they could save Nye Tian, they were willing to do anything." "At all costs? At all costs?" The corners of the Black Emperor's mouth twitched, but he smiled and said, "I'm afraid you won't accept the conditions set by that person." "Who is that man? Take us to him." Rui Qianyu and Cher said in unison, their eyes shining with passion. "You're 9-tailed chinchilla, aren't you?" Black Emperor glanced at the two of them and smiled bitterly. He then suddenly looked at Fat Cat and asked, "What do you want to say? Just say it." Fat Cat frowned and said in a deep voice, "How much do you know about the Feng Tian sect story?" Black Emperor smiled bitterly and asked again, "What are you trying to tell me?" Fat Cat's expression darkened. She really did not have the patience to talk in riddles with Black Emperor. Black Emperor was not in a hurry as he continued, "A long time ago, our sect was called the Feng Tian sect. But now, people only know the Feng Tian Fate sect. Are the Feng Tian sect and the Feng Tian Fate sect really the same sect? Are they not?" Fat Cat frowned and asked in surprise. "You can say yes, but you can also say no." Black Emperor laughed and said, "A long time ago, after the first Beacon Emperor of the Feng Tian sect passed away, there was a civil war in the sect. The entire sect was split into 2. The Feng Tian Fate sect and the Feng Tian Soul sect. During the war between the 2 sects, the Feng Tian Fate sect won and the Feng Tian Soul sect retreated. Although the Feng Tian Fate sect eventually obtained the inheritance of the Feng Tian sect, the entire sect's strength was greatly reduced. Plus, we haven't been able to find a new Beacon King, so we're now a second-rate sect. This is the story of the Feng Tian sect." After saying that, the Black Emperor could not help but let out a sigh. Feng Tian Fate sect, Feng Tian Soul sect. Fat Cat seemed to understand something after hearing Black Emperor's words. She frowned and said, "The cultivators of the Feng Tian Fate sect only cultivate the martial path and fate. Could it be that the people of the Feng Tian Soul sect only cultivate the heavenly path and soul? One Fate sect and one Soul sect, one cultivates the martial path while the other cultivates the heavenly path and soul." The Black Emperor looked at little Fat Cat and nodded his head. Fat Cat noticed Black Emperor's gloomy expression and suddenly remembered something. She exclaimed, "The person with the 9 lifelines is from the Feng Tian Soul sect." "Yes." Black Emperor nodded again and said, "That person was the former High Priest of the Feng Tian sect." High Priest. Little Fat Cat was stunned for a moment, its face full of shock. Wasn't Black Emperor the Feng Tian sect's High Priest? Why was there another one? The Feng Tian sect had 2 High Priests. Black Emperor smiled bitterly and said, "During the Feng Tian sect's civil war, I supported the Feng Tian Fate sect while he supported the Feng Tian Soul sect. In the end, the Feng Tian Soul sect was defeated and he retreated." "Do you know where he is?" Fat Cat's eyes flickered with unconcealable passion. Judging from Black Emperor's expression, he must have a special relationship with the other High Priest. "I know." Black Emperor nodded and remained silent for a long time before saying, "We were sworn brothers. Although we weren't born from the same blood, we were closer than blood brothers. It was just that at that time we had differing opinions. In the end, we went from brothers to the deepest enemies." After saying that, the Black Emperor's eyes became moist. From this, it could be seen how deep his feelings for the other High Priest were. "Is this why you don't want to bring us to him?" Fat Cat asked after a few seconds of silence. Black Emperor's face was gloomy as he said, I haven't seen him for millions of years. He's not sure if he's still alive. Even if he's alive, it will be very difficult for him to save the Beacon Emperor. Fat Cat frowned and said, No matter how difficult it is, we have to try. Then let's go now. The Black Emperor was silent for a long time before he finally spoke. His face seemed to have aged several decades in the blink of an eye. Following that, Black Emperor brought Fat Cat and the rest to a secluded place in the Een world, the Soul Rearing Peak. The other High Priest was also in the Een world, but at another place, the Soul Rearing Peak. A day later, Black Emperor's group arrived at a dark mountain range. Meng Wu. As soon as they arrived at the foot of the mountain, a deep and powerful voice was heard from the peak like a clap of thunder. Black Emperor's eyes squinted upon hearing the voice. While panicking, he was also surprised. He raised his head and said, Brother Ren, how have you been? Meng Wu, you still have the guts to come and find me? Following that, a cold and gloomy voice was heard from the sky. Brother Ren, I have a favor to ask of you. Black Emperor's eyes darkened slightly. Chapter 37-39. No regrets. Kneel and beg. Every single word in his deep voice was filled with overbearing arrogance and an unquestionable determination. When Little Fat Cat and the rest heard the man's words, they couldn't help but stare at the Black Emperor. The Black Emperor was begging his enemy to save Nye Tian. He was doing this because he was the High Priest and he had to save the Beacon Emperor. He was willing to die for Nye Tian. However, kneeling was an entirely different matter. Martial artists, especially powerful martial artists, often valued their dignity more than their lives. The Black Emperor was the great priest of the Fengtian Fate sect and the master of the Dark Martial Hall. He was one of the strongest martial artists in the Een city. It was more difficult for the man to make him kneel than to stab him with a sword. An expert would never kneel in life or death. However, the man was implying that if the Black Emperor did not kneel, they would not even be able to see him, let alone ask him to save Yi Futian. The Black Emperor's expression was dark. His eyes were trembling and his body was trembling. He was obviously suppressing himself. Was Nye Tian's life really worth it for him to give up his dignity? Meng Wu, it seems like you're unwilling to kneel. Then scram. At this moment, that person's voice came from the void again. It was incomparably deep. Boom! In the next instant, a violent force was unleashed and struck Fat Cat and the rest. This power did not have much lethality. However, it was filled with hostility. It was obvious that the man was very resentful towards the Black Emperor. I kneel. Just at this moment, the Black Emperor suddenly opened his mouth as his eyes widened in shock. Before anyone could even react, his knees sank as he knelt down on the ground. All right. Lord Black Emperor. The sudden turn of events caused Raindrop, Qianye, Schwerer, and the others to exclaim in shock. No one expected the Black Emperor to kneel. This was a representation of a martial artist's dignity. This person didn't expect the Dark Emperor to actually kneel. After a long silence, a deep voice came from the void. Meng Wu, the Fate School defeated the Fire Sky Soul School back then, but now you are kneeling before me. Do you regret what happened that day? What happened back then, I regret it all the time. The Black Emperor raised his head. Although he was kneeling on the ground, his expression was still cold and solemn as he said, If it wasn't for the civil war back then, the Fengtian sect wouldn't be what it is now. However, I, Meng Wu, have no regrets about the choice I made back then. I think I made the right choice. It's just that I didn't get the result I wanted. He was indeed very regretful, but he wasn't apologizing to the person in front of him. He was apologizing to himself, to the former Beacon Emperor. As the High Priest of the Fengtian sect, he regretted not being able to protect the Fengtian sect after the fall of the Beacon Emperor. At this moment, he was not kneeling to that person, but to the martial practitioners of the Sky Beacon Soul sect who died in his hands. Is that all? The person became even angrier after hearing the Black Emperor's words. You slaughtered so many martial practitioners of the Sky Beacon Soul Sect back then, don't you have any regrets? Regret? The Black Emperor laughed. There was no regret on his face, only coldness instead. He spoke with a deep tone. Ren Wufeng, if the Sky Beacon Soul School won back then, would you have let them go? Ren Wufeng remained silent for a long time. You and I were only serving different masters back then. It's not wrong for you to hate me for the destruction of the Sky Beacon Soul Sect. However, I, Meng Wu, can't do it if you want me to admit my mistakes and repent. The Black Emperor said with a stern expression. Can't do it? Ren Wufeng's voice suddenly sank. After a moment of silence, he laughed wildly. You're indeed my good sworn brother, you have guts. The Black Emperor's expression was gloomy and he didn't say anything. After a long time, Ren Wufeng's voice appeared again. Tell me, who is the person you want to save? Sir Beacon Emperor. The Black Emperor's eyes flickered and he hesitated for a moment before answering. Beacon Emperor? Ren Wufeng's voice changed when he heard the two words, Beacon Emperor. The Fengtian sect has a Beacon Emperor. The Sky Beacon sect has a Beacon Emperor? Ren Wufeng realized that it was inappropriate to call the Fengtian sect's Beacon Emperor, so he immediately changed his words. Yes. The Black Emperor's eyes flickered and he nodded. Impossible, impossible, this is absolutely impossible. At this time, Ren Wufeng seemed to have lost control of himself and began to shout. In the sky above the mountain range, a black-robed figure appeared. He stood there like a mountain peak, his body surging with an incomparably strange aura. His face was cold and full of wrinkles, as if he had experienced all the tragedies in the world. At this moment, he seemed to have lost his mind. His eyes were filled with an inexplicable fanaticism, as if he was excited and in disbelief, unwilling to believe the Black Emperor's words. He couldn't accept that someone could really merge the Sky Beacon technique and become the Beacon Emperor. The Fengtian sect could only have one Beacon Emperor, and that was the one that had fallen. There shouldn't be a second Beacon Emperor. Ren Wufeng, whether you believe it or not, Nie Tian is the Beacon Emperor. The Black Emperor looked at Ren Wufeng in the sky and cold said. Then, Nie Tian's figure appeared and floated in the air. There was no sign of life from his body, and he looked like a corpse. He's the new Beacon King? Ren Wufeng's expression flickered and his eyes flickered with astonishment. He could feel the aura of the Sky Beacon technique from Nie Tian. Yes. The Black Emperor nodded and didn't say anything else. He knew that Ren Wufeng would be able to confirm Nie Tian's identity without his explanation. How is this possible? Ren Wufeng's eyes were filled with passion as he stared at Nie Tian. After a long time, he finally spoke in shock. How could he merge the Sky Beacon technique? He was stunned on the spot for a long time, as if he was petrified. The Black Emperor looked at Ren Wufeng and didn't say anything. He seemed to have expected this reaction from Ren Wufeng. Humph. A moment later, Ren Wufeng suddenly sneered with a cold glint in his eyes. So what if he merged the Sky Beacon technique? He's the Beacon Emperor of your Sky Beacon sect, not the Beacon Emperor of my Sky Beacon sect. Ren Wufeng. The Dark Emperor's eyes quivered. He stood up and shouted, How bold of you to not recognize the Beacon King's identity! Have you forgotten the oath you made when you became the High Priest of the Fengtian High Priest? Ren Wufeng was stunned by the Black Emperor's words. He was speechless as if he was struck by lightning. Chapter 37:40. Chapter 37:35. Chapter 37:35. 3 conditions. The Black Emperor's words were spoken with great force. His words echoed in Ren Wufeng's ears like claps of thunder. Ren Wufeng's eyes trembled as he stood rooted to the ground, unable to react for a long time. The Black Emperor was right. According to the rules of the Fengtian sect, only the Beacon Emperor could merge with the Heavenly Beacon Art. Although the Heavenly Beacon Art that Nie Tian had merged with was only half of the Heavenly Beacon Art, it had proven that he could merge with it. Nie Tian's identity as the Beacon Emperor was confirmed. However, Ren Wufeng could not understand. How did Nie Tian manage to merge with the heavenly beacon art? Back then, after the passing of the first Beacon Emperor, all the talented martial artists of the Feng Tian sect tried to merge with the heavenly beacon art. Even Ren Wufeng tried. However, without exception, everyone failed. Ren Wufeng and Nie Tian were both martial artists with 9 life meridians. Why couldn't he merge with the heavenly beacon art, but Nie Tian could? Ren Wufeng, are you going to betray your oath? The Black Emperor looked at Ren Wufeng and growled. Betray my oath? Ren Wufeng's eyes widened as if he had just realized something. He then shouted, In my eyes, I only recognize the first Beacon Emperor. You say this kid is the Beacon Emperor. Is he worthy? Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, Ren Wufeng's eyes flashed with a cold light. Then, he moved and charged towards Nie Tian. In the blink of an eye, an extremely powerful force appeared. It was incomparably surging and roiling madly. Fat Cat and the rest were shocked. The aura that Ren Wufeng was emitting was too terrifying. At this moment, he actually intended to kill Nie Tian. Ren Wufeng, are you crazy? The Black Emperor's expression changed as he growled. Then, he moved and struck out with his palm to take on Ren Wufeng. Boom! Following that, the two terrifying forces clashed against each other, causing the entire space to tremble. It was as if the heavens and earth were about to collapse. Ren Wufeng and the Black Emperor's strengths were so formidable that they stood at the peak of the Yin dimension, and the might they possessed was obvious. Boom, boom, boom. In the next instant, waves of terrifying power exploded like raging wave. The Black Tharch and Ren Wufeng retreated at the same time and then stabilized themselves at the same time. However, there was a trail of blood at the corner of the Black Emperor's mouth. He was injured. Back when he fought with Great Emperor 3-Yin, his old injuries had yet to heal. Now that he was facing Ren Wufeng head-on, he was clearly not strong enough. However, after that palm strike, Ren Wufeng's figure froze. He seemed to have sobered up a little. His eyes trembled slightly as if he had just woken up from a dream. Ren Wufeng, do you really want to kill the Beacon Emperor? At that moment, Black Emperor looked at Ren Wufeng with murderous eyes and said cold. Ren Wufeng was stunned and speechless for a moment. At that moment, he suddenly realized that he had almost made a huge mistake in his anger. Nie Tian had integrated the Beacon Destiny technique, so he was the Beacon Emperor. Whether Ren Wufeng admitted it or not, that would not change. If Ren Wufeng had killed Nie Tian with that palm strike, he would have betrayed his oath and killed the Beacon Emperor. Thinking of that, Ren Wufeng's eyes trembled and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. Ren Wufeng, if you really want to kill the Beacon Emperor, I won't stop you anymore. Do it. At that moment, the Black Emperor suddenly moved and flashed to the side. He stared at Ren Wufeng cold and said. However, Ren Wufeng was stunned. He was speechless for a long time, as if he had been petrified. Little Fat Cat and the others looked at Ren Wufeng, their eyes burning with passion. Of course, they could tell that Ren Wufeng's mentality was changing. Follow me. After a long time, Ren Wufeng finally spoke. His eyes trembled slightly and he said in a deep voice. As he spoke, his figure flashed and flashed towards a mountain peak. The Black Emperor reacted and his eyes lit up. He immediately brought Nie Tian with him and followed Ren Wufeng. After a while, the Black Emperor and the rest followed Ren Wufeng to a square on the mountain peak. At that moment, Ren Wufeng suddenly stopped. He did not move and did not speak for a long time. Brother Ren, you must save the Beacon Emperor. The Black Emperor did not know what Ren Wufeng was thinking and was worried that he would change his mind. Without turning around, Ren Wufeng said in a deep voice, I have 3 conditions. Promise me and I will save him immediately. The Black Emperor was stunned and nodded in response. He did not expect Ren Wufeng to have conditions to save Nie Tian. First, after I save him, He has to remove my identity as the Beacon Sky High Priest in the name of the Beacon Emperor. Ren Wufeng's eyes flickered and he said in a deep voice, his back still facing the Black Emperor and the rest. Sure. The Black Emperor stared at Ren Wufeng's back for a long time before he finally nodded. It seemed like Ren Wufeng had been carrying the identity of the Beacon Sky High Priest for too long, to the point that he did not want to carry it any longer. Second, the new Beacon Sky High Priest will be succeeded by my grandson, Ren Yixing. Ren Wufeng's lips twitched as he said with a strange expression. Sure. The Black Emperor frowned and agreed without hesitation. It turned out that Ren Wufeng had given up his position as the Beacon Sky High Priest so that his grandson could succeed him. The Black Emperor did not expect Ren Wufeng to have a descendant. Ren Wufeng stood on the spot and did not speak for a long time. What about the third condition? The Black Emperor looked at Ren Wufeng and asked impatiently. The third condition is her. At this moment, Ren Wufeng suddenly turned around. His eyes were as sharp as a blade as he locked onto Shui. Her. The Black Emperor was stunned for a moment. He could not help but frown and his expression changed. He did not understand what Ren Wufeng meant. Me. Cher was also taken aback. Her beautiful eyes flickered as she took a step forward and asked, Senior, what do you mean? Can you explain it clearly? I want you to marry my grandson. Ren Wufeng's eyes flickered as he uttered each word clearly. Cher's beautiful eyes quivered when she heard Ren Wufeng's words. She was so shocked that she was speechless. She had never expected that Ren Wufeng's last condition would be like this. No. Before the Black Emperor could reply, Rui Qianyu took a step forward and rejected him decisively. Of course, she knew the relationship between Cher and Ye Tian. Although Cher and Ye Tian were not officially husband and wife, they had been together for a long time. How could Cher marry someone else? Cher's beautiful eyes trembled, and she did not know what to say. Meng Wu, do you agree to the third condition? However, Ren Wufeng did not care about Cher and Rui Qianyu. He looked at the Black Emperor and asked. Chapter 3741. Ye Tian woke up. Black Emperor's eyes were deep and solemn. He didn't speak for a long time. He wasn't a fool. He could tell the relationship between Ye Tian and Cher. Even though he was the high priest of the Dark Martial Hall, Black Emperor, he didn't know how to answer Ren Wufeng. He could make decisions for Ye Tian on other matters, but he couldn't do it on this matter. After a moment of silence, Black Emperor looked at Ren Wufeng and asked, Ren Wufeng, do you know the relationship between the Beacon Emperor and this lady? I can tell. I don't need you to remind me, Ren Wufeng said with a cold smile. With his experience and observation skills, he could tell that Cher and Rui Qianyu had an unusual relationship with Ye Tian. Since you know that this lady belongs to the Beacon Emperor, why do you still want her to marry your grandson? Black Emperor frowned and said, Have you really thought it through? The deep voice carried a hint of threat. Ye Tian was the Beacon Emperor. If Ren Wufeng's grandson became the high priest of the Beacon Emperor, he would be Ye Tian's direct subordinate. However, this direct subordinate was the one who snatched the Beacon Emperor away. Could he still be the high priest of the Beacon Emperor for long? I can see it clearly. You don't have to threaten me. Ren Wufeng's face was extremely gloomy. If you don't agree to the third condition, please leave. You. The Dark Emperor's eyes narrowed and his face darkened. He didn't expect Ren Wufeng to be so insistent. Even if he had to risk betraying his oath, betraying everything, Ren Wufeng was determined to marry Shui to his grandson. What was going on? Meng Wu, since you don't dare to make the decision, why don't you listen to what this lady has to say? See if she's willing to see our Beacon Emperor die. Ren Wufeng smirked coldly as he stared at Shui, like a wolf eyeing its prey. 3 years. At this moment, Cher had calmed down. Her beautiful eyes emitted an icy chill as she said, I'm willing to stay here for 3 years. If your grandson still wants to marry me after 3 years, I will marry him. Ren Wufeng looked at Cher, and could not help but be stunned for a few seconds. He clearly did not expect that the latter would actually heal him like this. All right. I will wait for 3 years. Ren Wufeng thought for a long time, then laughed and said, "It just so happens that after 3 years, it is time for Yi Xing to make his own decision." Cher you. Rui Qianyu's eyes trembled. She didn't expect this to happen. "I know what I'm doing." Cher smiled faintly. The corners of her mouth twitched, but it made people's hearts ache even more. "Leave him to me." At this moment, Ren Wufeng nodded solemnly and flew towards the palace behind him with Nie Tian in tow. Cher and Rui Qianyu immediately reacted and wanted to follow, but Black Emperor stopped them. He has already promised to save Sir Beacon Emperor, so he will not go back on his word. Black Emperor looked at Rui Qianyu and Cher and nodded. Cher and Rui Qianyu hesitated for a while, but eventually stopped and waited on the square. At the same time, in the Cloud Peak Hall, Ren Wufeng held Nie Tian's body with one hand and began to slowly sense the latter's aura. He is so badly injured, but his martial body did not collapse, and his spiritual soul still exists. His vitality is really strong. Ren Wufeng looked at Nie Tian and could not help but exclaim. At this moment, he was still a little repulsed by Nie Tian's identity. However, he had to admit that Nie Tian's martial body was indeed strong, and his vitality was even more terrifying. He vaguely understood why Nie Tian was able to integrate the Feng Tian destiny technique. "Sir Beacon Emperor, do you know that I won't be able to live if I save you?" Ren Wufeng murmured with a bitter smile and sighed. Many people think that once a martial artist reaches the sage realm, he can coexist with the heavens and earth and shine as brightly as the sun and moon. Don't they know that this is just nonsense? No matter how strong a martial artist is, he can't fight against the heavens and earth. In this world, only time is an absolute existence. The sea can dry up, and the stone can rot, let alone a martial artist's flesh and blood. Moreover, when a martial artist's strength reaches the later stages, if he cannot advance further, his martial body will also age and become weak. Eternity is just a lie. Then, Ren Wufeng shook his head and smiled again. His face was filled with bitterness and sorrow. Many people thought that once a martial artist reached the sage realm, he would never die. In reality, that was not the case at all. Ren Wufeng had lived for millions of years, and he had once been a peak paramount sage. However, as he grew older, his strength slowly deteriorated. Now, he could only hole up in the underworld and could no longer roam the All Saints world. The path of a martial artist was like rowing a boat against the current. If one could not continuously advance, they were destined to fall from the peak by the flow of time. Ren Wufeng was an expert with 9 life meridians. His life force was far greater than other martial artists, but if he wanted to activate Nie Tian's martial body, he had to expend a great amount of life force. After reviving Nie Tian, his martial body would inevitably become even weaker. As a matter of fact, how long he could live would depend on the will of the heavens. "Let's begin." Ren Wufeng sighed and shook his head. His lips curled into a bitter smile, and he began to release life force, which slowly surged into Nie Tian's body. In an instant, the surging life force directly enveloped Nie Tian, causing his already exhausted body to have signs of life again. Following that, as the life force slowly surged in, Nie Tian's damaged martial body began to slowly recover. However, it would not be easy to completely activate Nie Tian's martial body. Ren Wufeng had already made the most arduous preparations. In the blink of an eye, 3 days passed. Ren Wufeng continued to release life force. At that moment, he seemed incomparably old and his face was dim. In order to save Nie Tian, he had expended too much life force. However, Nie Tian still could not activate his martial body. Why is this kid's martial body so powerful? Why hasn't it been activated yet? Ren Wufeng could not help but feel anxious. He did not expect Nye Tian's martial body to be so powerful. The more powerful the martial body, the more life force was required to activate it again. If this continued, Ren Wufeng's life force would be completely exhausted. Ren Wufeng's forehead was covered in sweat. He was clearly panicking. At that moment, Nye Tian's body suddenly trembled, and then he let out a low moan. He's awake. Ren Wufeng's eyes trembled, and he was pleasantly surprised. At that moment, Nye Tian's closed eyes suddenly opened. He was really awake. However, his eyes were not normal. They were pitch black, like two incomparably dark abysses. Ren Wufeng suddenly noticed something, and his expression changed as he exclaimed. Chapter 3742. Chapter 3737. Chapter 3737, Must Bear. What dark power? Nye Tian suddenly woke up, but his body suddenly released a huge amount of dark energy, causing Ren Wufeng's expression to change abruptly, and he cried out in shock. Clearly, he hadn't expected that Nye Tian would suddenly unleash such violent dark power. This dark energy actually made him feel threatened, and it was the kind of threat that seeped into his bones and soul. He had a feeling that if this dark power seeped into his body, he would fall into endless darkness. In the blink of an eye, he reacted. A dark blue light surged from his body and wrapped around him like a shield. Then, he moved and retreated several hundred meters away. Bang! Crack, crack, crack. At this moment, the dark power on Nye Tian's body suddenly burst out, spreading out like raging waves, directly bombarding Ren Wufeng's body. The deep blue shield was instantly removed, and then immediately shattered. However, Ren Wufeng had already retreated to the outside of the hall. He waved his hand and a seal appeared in the void, instantly sealing the door of the hall. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The hall was filled with the power of darkness. It attacked the seal on the door, causing loud noises. It was extremely terrifying. Ren Wufeng looked at the violent dark energy in front of him, and let out a long sigh of relief. Bean-sized beads of sweat seeped out of his forehead, and he felt a lingering fear. The dark energy was simply too violent. If his reaction had been any slower, he would have been infected by the dark energy, and the consequences would have been unthinkable. Brother Ren. Just then, the Black Emperor saw Ren Wufeng walking out of the main hall. He hurried forward and yelled, "How is Nye Tian?" Rui Qianyu and Cher also rushed over and looked at Ren Wufeng anxiously. Ren Wufeng took a deep breath and finally calmed down. His aged face froze for a long time before he said, "I've already helped him activate his martial body, but his body suddenly released a dark power that wants to devour me. I can only leave the hall first." Black Emperor and the rest were stunned when they heard Ren Wufeng's words. They only reacted after a long time and asked, "Is Nye Tian alive or dead?" "I don't know." Ren Wufeng's eyes were extremely deep. He shook his head and sighed. He'll have to rely on himself for what happens next. None of us can help him. After saying this, his eyes flickered with a worried look. The moment Nye Tian's dark energy erupted, he felt that the dark energy not only wanted to devour him, but it also wanted to devour Nye Tian. The power of darkness in this hall is released by the Beacon Emperor? Emperor Black suddenly noticed the power of darkness in the hall. His eyes trembled as he asked in shock. Ren Wufeng nodded and did not say anything else. At this moment, the fat cat seemed to have sensed something. Her eyes narrowed and she exclaimed in shock. He sensed the devouring aura of the dark power through the seal on the door of the hall. This aura did not seem to belong to Nye Tian. "It's that guy." The fat cat suddenly realized what was going on. Her eyes narrowed as she exclaimed. Before Ren Wufeng rescued Nye Tian, the last person who had come into contact with Nye Tian was the Devil's Knight. Devil's Knight had said that he was helping Nye Tian stabilize his spiritual soul. However, it seemed like what he was doing was not as simple as stabilizing his spiritual soul. Damn it, that guy really did something. The fat cat came to her senses and growled in her heart. She and the Ghost Emperor had been very careful at that time, but she did not expect the Devil's Knight to still do something to Nye Tian. Otherwise, Nye Tian would not be in this state. However, it was too late to say anything now that things had come to this. At this moment, the fat cat had no other choice but to rely on Nye Tian himself. Boom boom boom. In the hall, the dark power was like a raging wave, surging endlessly. The entire hall was like a sea of darkness, extremely evil. Nye Tian was in the center of the sea of darkness, enduring the most powerful impact of the dark power. Nye Tian's divine sense had already recovered, but his body was suppressed by the violent dark power around him, and he could not move at all. This aura, it's the Devil's Knight. His eyes trembled slightly as he exclaimed in his heart. He did not know what had happened to his body, but he was very sure that the dark power flowing in the space was from the Devil's Knight. At this moment the Ghost Emperor's voice rang out, "That guy is really sinister. He actually left something on your body." "Ghost Emperor, what happened?" Nye Tian's eyes flickered as he asked in a deep voice. In his memory, he was already dead. Why was he being shrouded by such a huge dark power at this moment? The Black Emperor told him what had happened before and finally said, "Nye Tian, you must find a way to absorb this dark power. Otherwise, you will be devoured." Absorb? Nye Tian was stunned for a moment. His face slightly sank as he said, "This power came from the Devil's Knight. Can my martial body withstand his power?" "You have no choice. You must endure it," the Ghost Emperor replied in a deep voice, very resolute. If Nye Tian could not withstand this dark power, he would be devoured, so he must absorb it. Nye Tian's eyes slightly sank as he closed them and began to seriously sense the dark power in the space around him. The Devil's Knight was born from the demon god nascent embryo. All of his power came from Nye Tian, but this power appeared to be even darker in his body. Nye Tian should be able to absorb and fuse with the Devil's Knight's power. At this time, the dark power oppressed Nye Tian's body, making him suffer indescribable pain. But he did not make a sound. Instead, he carefully sensed the power. After a long time, a mysterious scene occurred. The dark power in the space around him began to become gentle and slowly flowed into Nye Tian's martial body. "It's starting to absorb." When the Ghost Emperor sensed this, his eyes lit up and he could not help but exclaim. The fact that Nye Tian had begun to fuse with the dark power was a good sign. Following that, as Nye Tian slowly absorbed the dark power, the dark aura in the hall gradually weakened. Outside the hall, when the fat cat saw that the dark power had weakened, her tensed face relaxed a lot. Half a day later, all the dark power in the hall had been absorbed by Nye Tian and the hall returned to its original brightness. At that moment, Nye Tian's eyes snapped open. He rose to his feet and stood coldly in the middle of the great hall, like a sharp sword, emanating an incomparably sharp aura. Chapter 37:43. Chapter 37:38. Chapter 37:38. Neither of them can be omitted. Nye Tian, how do you feel? Nye Tian stood in the main hall, and the Ghost Emperor's voice sounded out, sounding extremely excited. The process of Nye Tian absorbing the dark energy was smoother than he had imagined. "Yes, I feel very good." Nye Tian faintly smiled. His eyes were surging with a sharp light. His entire person seemed to be extremely sharp, like an unsheathed sword. His aura was much stronger than before, and his sword intent was sharper than before. However, there was a dark power lingering around his body that refused to dissipate. The Ghost Emperor sensed Nye Tian's body and immediately discovered that something was wrong. He asked in a deep voice, "Nye Tian, you forcibly fused the dark energy into your inverse mark, didn't you?" Nye Tian nodded, and his expression suddenly changed. In that kind of situation, he could only integrate the dark force into the divine demon inverse inscription. With his newly activated martial body, if he were to withstand such a terrifying force, he would most likely explode and die. When the Ghost Emperor heard Nye Tian's words, he immediately fell silent. No wonder the process of absorbing the power of darkness was so much smoother than he had expected. It turned out that Nye Tian had integrated the power of darkness into the God-Demon inverse mark. After a long moment of silence, the Ghost Emperor asked, Nye Tian, do you know what the risks of doing this are? Yes. Nye Tian nodded and said, the dark force is the best nourishment for the celestial devil inscription. After fusing with the dark force, the celestial devil inscription will become stronger rapidly, and the pressure on my martial body will also become stronger. The Ghost Emperor's eyes darkened slightly as he said, the Divine Demon Inverse Rune is already very powerful. It exerts a strong pressure on your martial body. In addition, you used the Divine Demon Inverse Rune not long ago, which resulted in the backlash of the Inverse Rune. You almost died because of that. Originally, the Divine Demon Inverse Mark had already become stronger after the backlash. Now that it has fused with the power of darkness, it has undoubtedly become even more terrifying. Most importantly, the growth of the Celestial Demon Inverse Inscription will be beyond imagination in the coming period. With your current martial body, it will not be able to withstand the pressure of the Divine Demon Inverse Rune. By integrating the power of darkness into the Divine Demon Inverse Rune, you are only able to delay the immediate threat. The Ghost Emperor's face turned solemn, and he did not continue. Nye Tian nodded and didn't say anything. At that moment, the Celestial Demon Inverse Mark in his body was like a sword hanging above his head. It could fall at any time. Nye Tian, you'll have to improve your strength and martial body as fast as possible in the coming days. At that moment, the Ghost Emperor's voice rang out again. Only then can you withstand the pressure of the Divine Demon Inverse Mark. Nye Tian nodded vigorously, his eyes shining with a fierce light. Yeah. Black. The Inverse 255 Tian said. Ren Wufeng, on the other hand, seemed to be extremely cautious. He sensed the fluctuation of aura within the hall, and only after confirming that the aura of darkness had completely vanished did he open the seal. The dark aura just now was too terrifying, so he had no choice but to be extra careful. Once the seal was lifted, the Black Emperor and the others immediately entered the hall. Nye Tian. Rui Qianyu and Cher came to Nye Tian's side excitedly. Ryu, Schwer. Nye Tian looked at the two beauties in front of him, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a warm smile. Before he fainted, he saw Rui Qianyu and Cher. Are you all right? Rui Qianyu and Cher's eyes trembled at the same time, asking in unison. I'm fine now. Nye Tian nodded with a smile. There was a hint of determination in his calmness. Since there were other people around, Rui Qianyu and Cher soon calmed down. Then, everyone took their seats in the hall. Under the Black Emperor's signal, Nye Tian sat on the main seat, and Ren Wufeng had no objections. Since he had sacrificed his life to save Nye Tian, it meant that he had acknowledged Nye Tian's identity as the Beacon Emperor. However, there were still some things that needed to be clarified between Ren Wufeng and Nye Tian. Thank you, Lord Black Emperor. Fat Cat returned to Nye Tian's body. Nye Tian looked at the Black Emperor and smiled to express his gratitude. The Ghost Emperor had already told Nye Tian everything that had happened not long ago. It's my duty. The Black Emperor nodded slightly, but he looked a little nervous. He could not help but glance at Ren Wufeng. Ren Wufeng did not avoid it. Instead, he stood up and looked at Nye Tian with a pair of experienced eyes. He bowed slightly and said, Lord Beacon Emperor, before I saved you, I mentioned 3 conditions. I hope you can fulfill them. His deep voice was neither servile nor overbearing, and he had no intention of going back on his words. Nye Tian looked at Ren Wufeng. The vicissitudes of life on the latter's face made his heart tremble. After a moment of hesitation, he said, I can agree to the first 2 conditions, but the third. None of the 3 conditions can be omitted. However, He was interrupted by Ren Wufeng before he could finish. Nie Tian's gaze froze. He had not expected Ren Wufeng to be so determined. What if I order you as the Beacon Emperor? Nie Tianling's face darkened as he said coldly. Lord Beacon Emperor, I am no longer the High Priest of Beacon Sky. You cannot order me, Ren Wufeng replied coldly. Nie Tian's expression changed. It seemed that Ren Wufeng had already thought of everything. Senior, can I see that person? At this moment, Nie Tian still wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by Snow, who took a step forward and said to Ren Wufeng. Okay. Ren Wufeng hesitated for a moment before he nodded. Following that, with a wave of his palm, a wave of soul power surged out, passing through the hall and directly being released outside. Not long after, a figure appeared outside the hall. It was Ren Wufeng's grandson, Ren Yixing. Nie Tian was sitting in the hall. When he saw Ren Yixing's figure, his eyes narrowed and his expression changed. The faces of the Black Emperor and the others froze as well. Grandpa, are you looking for Yixing? A small figure walked over from outside the hall and shouted at the top of his lungs. His voice was clear and filled with innocence. It was a skinny figure that looked like he was only 5 or 6 years old. Nie Tian and the others did not expect Ren Wufeng to let Cher marry Ren Wufeng was actually a kid. Cher was also stunned. However, she seemed to have discovered something in the next moment, and her expression changed abruptly. Chapter 3744. The meridian of Imperial Murderin Yixing came to the main hall and saw many strangers. His pair of watery eyes flickered with fear and excitement. He timidly walked to Ren Wufeng's side, held the latter's clothes with both hands, and asked in a low voice, Grandpa, who are they? Yixing, they are Grandpa's friends. They won't hurt you. Ren Wufeng patted his grandson's head. His eyes flickered with unconcealable affection as he spoke with a smile. Ren Yixing nodded. His eyes flickered as he cautiously glanced at Nie Tian and the others. His eyes flickered when he saw Cher, as if he had seen something different. Nie Tian looked at Ren Yixing in front of him, and his expression became awkward and ugly. He initially thought Ren Yixing was a young man, or even a middle-aged man. If that were the case, he would use his identity as the Beacon Emperor to pressure the man into giving up on Cher. Although it was a despicable move, Nie Tian did not mind. However, the situation was different now. He did not expect Ren Yixing to be a 5-year-old kid. Even if he could disregard his identity, he could not possibly threaten a kid. At that instant, Nie Tian suddenly noticed that Cher was looking at Ren Yixing with a strange gaze. He frowned in surprise. Meanwhile, Cher's eyes were trembling as she stared at Ren Yixing, as if she was extremely excited. Meanwhile, the Black Emperor's expression changed, as if he had noticed something too. The Meridian of 3 Lives. In the midst of Nie Tian's astonishment, the Fat Cat and the Ghost Emperor exclaimed at the same time. The Meridian of 3 Lives? Nie Tian's eyes glistened when he heard the words. He immediately scanned Ren Yixing with his divine sense, and his expression stiffened in the next instant. This kid has the Meridian of 3 Lives. After a while, Nie Tian finally reacted and murmured. At this moment, he seemed to understand why Ren Wufeng insisted on marrying Cher to Ren Yixing. It was because both of them had the meridians of 3 lives. Nie Tian, this child is not as simple as you think. Not only does he have the 3 lives meridian, he also has the 3 lives killing meridian. At this moment, the Fat Cat's voice rang out, sounding nervous and excited. To be more precise, it's the strongest killing meridian of the 3 lives killing meridian, the Royal Killing Meridian. Imperial Killer Meridian? Nie Tian's eyes flickered when he heard the Fat Cat's words. Nie Tian, do you still remember 7 kills? Fat Cat's eyes narrowed as she suddenly asked. Of course. Nie Tian nodded solemnly. He had fought 7 kills many times and knew how terrifying the latter was. However, 7 Kills was willing to sacrifice himself in order to kill the Emperor of the Underworld. It ended up benefiting Lian Jiufeng instead. 7 Kills possesses the 3 lives killing meridian of the 3 lives killing meridian. However, his killing meridian isn't the strongest. It's only the royal killing meridian at best. Fat Cat cackled. The kid before you has awakened his ancestral bloodline. The 3 lives killing meridian is the strongest royal killing meridian. Are you saying that he'll be even stronger than 7 Kills when he grows up? Nie Tian asked in astonishment. That's not all. Little Fat Cat smiled again and said, the power of the bloodline of the king is at least 10 times that of the bloodline of the king. In other words, at the same level, this child's battle power is even more terrifying than 7 Kills. If he can awaken the royal killing meridian, I wonder how strong he'll become in the future. Nie Tian was stunned by Fat Cat's words. He was speechless for a long time. He hadn't thought that the child before him would be so monstrous. Unfortunately, this kid's royal killing meridian has yet to awaken. At this time, little Fat Cat sighed, and in the next moment it seemed to have thought of something, and it said in shock. Could it be Nie Tian's expression changed when he saw Fat Cat's reaction? Could it be what? Fat Cat's expression changed when he saw Fat Cat's reaction. He quickly asked, could it be what? Could it be that the old man wants to use Cher's 3 lives meridian as a sacrifice for this kid? Fat Cat was stunned for a long time before he blurted out in astonishment. Sacrifice? Upon hearing this word, Nie Tian's expression immediately changed, and his face darkened. Offering was not a good word, and its meaning was self-evident. The royal killing meridian is extremely invasive and difficult to awaken. It can only be awakened by devouring other 3 lives meridian. Fat Cat was stunned for a few seconds before he said, this old man is obviously trying to use Cher's 3 lives meridian for this kid to devour to help him awaken the royal killing meridian. This. Nie Tian's eyes flickered with astonishment. His expression flickered as he sprang to his feet and growled like a raging beast. Absolutely not. Everyone was taken aback by his roar, and they all turned to look at him in astonishment. No one knew what Nie Tian had discovered. Why was he so irritable all of a sudden? Although Black Emperor and Cher could tell that Ren Yixing had the 3 lives meridian, they couldn't tell anything else. Grandpa, what's wrong with him? Ren Yixing suddenly realized that Nie Tian was glaring at him. He was so frightened that he shrank back and hid behind Ren Wufeng. Master Beacon Emperor, what are you doing? Are you going back on your word? Ren Wufeng wasn't afraid. He took a step forward and asked Nie Tian with a cold gaze. Sacrifice to awaken the royal killing meridian. Senior Ren, shouldn't you explain it to me? Nie Tian's eyes darkened as he looked at Ren Wufeng with a murderous look. Ren Wufeng had saved his life. Nie Tian was grateful to him. If Ren Wufeng had simply wanted Cher to marry Ren Yixing, Nie Tian could understand. However, Ren Wufeng's plan wasn't that simple. Ren Wufeng's aged face changed when he heard Nie Tian mention the royal killing meridian. He didn't expect Nie Tian to see through everything from Ren Yixing. Senior Ren, you don't want Cher to marry Ren Yixing at all. You want Cher to be a sacrifice. Nie Tian's eyes were cold and murderous as he stared at Ren Wufeng. How could Cher be a sacrifice for someone of her status? Ren Wufeng was shocked and suddenly couldn't speak, and his old face became extremely ugly. Senior Ren, you are so vicious. If you weren't the High Priest of the Sky Beacon High Priest and saved my life, I would have killed you right now. Nie Tian's face was gloomy. Judging from Ren Wufeng's reaction, Fat Cat's guess was completely correct. Ren Wufeng suddenly raised his head and looked at Nie Tian. His eyes were cold and he didn't speak. Nie Tian also stared at Ren Wufeng. The atmosphere was stifling. Chapter 3745. Breaking the Oath. Ren Yixing's sudden action stunned everyone in the hall, and the atmosphere changed once again. The Black Emperor and the others were puzzled. They did not know why the initially calm Nye Tian had suddenly become so violent and even showed killing intent. They did not know what had happened between Nye Tian and Ren Wufeng. At this moment, Nye Tian looked at Ren Yixing and could not help but feel his heart soften. For the first time, he made a 5-year-old child feel threatened. He could not help but feel touched. It seemed like he was bullying the old and the weak. He did not feel good. Yixing, don't cry. At this moment, Ren Wufeng's face suddenly darkened and he shouted in a cold voice. Ren Yixing seemed to be frightened and immediately stopped crying. Ren Wufeng's face was cold and solemn. He did not want to be treated as a weakling. Moreover, he believed that he had never been a weakling. He had just activated his martial physique for Nye Tian and had consumed a lot of his life force. His martial physique had also suffered a certain impact, causing his strength to decline greatly. And Nye Tian's gaze was extremely disgusting. Nye Tian's gaze was clearly a kind of pity. He, Ren Wufeng, had lived a magnanimous life. He did not need anyone's pity. Lord Beacon Emperor, if you do not wish to fulfill my conditions, you can leave now. I will not stop you. Ren Wufeng suddenly raised his head and said with a firm gaze, If you want to kill me, I, Ren Wufeng, will not resist. Every word was sonorous and magnanimous. It was filled with unyielding pride and righteousness. He wanted to use Cher's 3 lives meridian to awaken the royal killer meridian for Ren Yixing. It was indeed a little despicable. But this was the condition he had proposed beforehand. The Black Emperor and the others had already agreed. Even Cher herself had agreed. He did not think that what he had done was wrong. Senior Ren, I am grateful to you for saving my life, but if you want to use Cher as a sacrifice, I will never agree to it. Nye Tian felt the determination in Ren Wufeng's eyes and was slightly moved. He said, You can tell me Ren Yixing's current situation. I, Nye Tian, swear on my martial path and the name of the Beacon Emperor that I will definitely help you. Help? Ren Wufeng looked at Nye Tian. His face sank, but he sneered and said, Can you help? Ren Wufeng couldn't help but become agitated as he spoke. He pointed at Ren Yixing and said, He's the last descendant of the 3 lifetimes slaughter vein. If he can't awaken the sovereign slaughter vein within 3 years, he'll die without a doubt. Then Ren Wufeng's eyes suddenly trembled. He stared at Nye Tian and said, My Lord Beacon Emperor, what ability do you think you have to help me? Nye Tian's eyes suddenly sank, and his expression instantly changed to become incomparably gloomy. No wonder Ren Wufeng wanted Cher to marry Ren Yixing at all costs. It turned out that Ren Yixing's situation had already become so serious. Since you don't want to fulfill your previous promise, then leave. I'll pretend that I've never seen you before. Ren Wufeng's cold gaze swept across Nye Tian, and he suddenly moved and said, I won't see you out. Nye Tianling stood where he was, and his eyes were gloomy. After a long silence he said, I, Nye Tian, am not someone who goes back on his words. Isn't your goal to awaken the sovereign slaughter vein for Ren Yixing? I promise you that I will definitely return within 3 years and help him awaken the sovereign slaughter vein. Ren Wufeng looked at Nye Tian, and his cold expression softened a little. He then sneered and said, Lord Beacon Emperor, do you think I will believe your words? If Ren Yixing fails to awaken the sovereign slaughter vein in 3 years, I will accompany him in death. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, and he suddenly took a step forward. A sharp sword intent swept across his forehead, and a strand of silver hair floated down, cutting off his hair to make a vow. The Black Emperor, Ren Wufeng, and the rest could not help but change their expressions when they saw Nye Tian's sudden action. They were instantly stunned and petrified on the spot. They never expected that Nye Tian would cut off his hair to make a vow. He was so decisive. Senior Ren, give me 3 years, and I will definitely return. At that time, if I fail to awaken Ren Yixing's sovereign slaughter vein, my head will be cut off like this strand of hair. Nye Tian took a step forward and said to Ren Wufeng with a solemn gaze, Ren Wufeng's eyes narrowed, and his face was filled with murderous intent. After a long while, he finally nodded his head. Brother Ren, I am willing to guarantee on behalf of Lord Beacon Emperor that if Lord Beacon Emperor fails to awaken the Sovereign Slaughter Vein in 3 years, I, Meng Wu, will accompany Lord Beacon Emperor in death. The Black Emperor reacted and said to Ren Wufeng with a solemn gaze. He believed in Nye Tian, and he believed in the Beacon Emperor of the Feng Tian Fate sect. Ren Wufeng nodded, and he suddenly looked at Nye Tian and said, Lord Beacon Emperor, I hope you will remember that Ren Yixing is now the great oracle of the Feng Tian Fate sect. Nye Tian smiled faintly and nodded. Of course. Meng Wu, I want to see Ren Yixing's ceremony as the great oracle now. Ren Wufeng said to the Black Emperor. Sure. The Black Emperor nodded, and he walked to Nye Tian's side to tell him something. Then, under the guidance of the Black Emperor, Nye Tian began Ren Yixing's ceremony as the great oracle of the Feng Tian Fate sect. Nye Tian used his blood to condense the Feng Tian Fate sect's brand and engraved it into Ren Yixing's body. Ren Yixing, you have the brand of the Beacon Emperor's blood in your body. From now on, you are the great oracle of the Feng Tian sect. Your entire life is to protect Lord Beacon Emperor. Ren Wufeng looked at Ren Yixing with a different kind of passion in his eyes, as if he was looking forward to something. He hoped that Ren Yixing could accomplish what he failed to do in the past. Although Ren Yixing did not understand what Ren Wufeng was talking about, he still nodded his head. His gem-like eyes were filled with determination. Lord Beacon Emperor, congratulations on having your own great oracle. Ren Wufeng looked at Nye Tian and bowed slightly. He was obviously reminding Nye Tian that he had to awaken the Huangma Meridian for Ren Yixing. Nye Tian smiled faintly and nodded. He naturally understood Ren Wufeng's meaning. He would definitely awaken the Huangma Meridian for Ren Yixing. If Ren Yixing grew up in the future, he would be a great help to him. Brother Ren, you're not from the Meridian of 3 Lives, right? The Black Emperor suddenly looked at Ren Wufeng and asked with a frown. I picked Ren Yixing up, Ren Wufeng said faintly as he looked at Ren Yixing. He did not say anything else. It was obvious that he did not want to talk too much about Ren Yixing's background. Lord Beacon Emperor, how are you going to deal with your own problems next? Ren Wufeng looked at Nye Tian and asked with a gloomy expression. He looked at Nye Tian with a strange expression. It was obvious that he had noticed the problem with Nye Tian. Chapter 3746. Senior Ren, I didn't expect you to see through it. Nye Tian became cold and smiled helplessly. Although Cher's matter had been resolved, the problem he was about to face was even more serious. The celestial demon in verse inscription in his body was becoming stronger all the time. His martial body was constantly under pressure. He had to increase his strength as soon as possible to withstand the pressure from the divine demon inscription. It was like a race between him and the divine demon inscription. He had to win. Nye Tian, what's wrong? Rui Qianyu and Cher immediately reacted and looked at Nye Tian anxiously. They had thought that Nye Tian would be fine after his martial body was activated again. When I activated the martial body for the Beacon Emperor, his body released a very powerful dark force. Before Nye Tian could speak, Ren Wufeng said, that dark force's aura is similar to the force in the Beacon Emperor's body, but it's different. It doesn't seem to come from the Beacon Emperor's body. I'm guessing that it's a trick that someone left in the Beacon Emperor's body to kill the Beacon Emperor. Although the Beacon Emperor absorbed the dark force in the end, I can sense that the force is still violent and oppressing the Beacon Emperor's martial body. As Ren Wufeng spoke, he couldn't help but sigh. This power is very difficult to deal with. This Black Emperor's expression changed when he heard Ren Wufeng's words. He looked at Nye Tian and was speechless. Rui Qianyu and Cher were even more nervous. They had not expected that Nye Tian would still be in danger after his martial body was activated. It's not that serious. I can still suppress this force. Nie Tian swept his gaze across Rui Qinyu and Cher as he spoke with a faint smile. He did not want the two girls to worry about him. Senior Rin, since you mentioned this problem, may I ask if you have any solutions? Nie Tian looked at Ren Wufeng and said with a faint smile. He could tell that Ren Wufeng still had something to say. Ren Wufeng fell silent and didn't speak for a long time. Brother Ren, what method do you have? Just tell me. The Black Emperor was a bit anxious. Ren Wufeng let out a long sigh and said, that dark force is very powerful. If we want to suppress it, we need an even more powerful force. What power? Nie Tian's eyes were slightly hot as he stared at Ren Wufeng and asked. Heart of the Sky. Ren Wufeng's eyes were also hot as he said, if you want to suppress that dark force, Master Beacon Emperor must activate the power of the Heart of the Sky. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He did not expect Ren Wufeng to know that he had the Heart of the Sky in his body. Senior Ren, do you know a lot about the Heart of the Sky? Nie Tian looked at Ren Wufeng and asked with slight excitement. Ren Wufeng seemed to have some understanding of the Heart of the Sky. It's a coincidence. I was good friends with the former Master of the Sky in my early years. I have a scroll left behind by him. Ren Wufeng said as he took out an ancient animal skin scroll. The Sky Scroll. Nie Tian looked at the animal skin scroll and his eyes could not help but tremble. He did not expect Ren Wufeng to have something left behind by the former Master of the Sky. Master Beacon Emperor, the Sky Scroll is now yours. Ren Wufeng handed the scroll to Nie Tian and said, there is a special seal on the Sky Scroll. Only the Master of the Sky can open it. Nie Tian took the scroll and injected his spirit into it to sense the information. After a while, he withdrew his spirit, but his expression was not good. Master Beacon Emperor, what did you sense? Ren Wufeng could not help but ask curiously when he saw Nie Tian's reaction. The 5 calamities of the sky. Nie Tian frowned and said these words in a deep voice. The 5 calamities of the sky? Ren Wufeng was stunned. He did not understand what Nie Tian meant. Seeing everyone's curiosity, Nie Tian smiled and said, I sensed a map in the scroll. It's called the 5 calamities of the sky. It seems that the power of the 5 calamities of the sky is sealed in one place. Could it be that we need Master Beacon Emperor to search for the power of the 5 calamities of the sky? Ren Wufeng frowned and asked in a deep voice. That should be the case. Nie Tian nodded. He was also uncertain. Where are the 5 calamities of the sky? Black Emperor stepped forward and asked. The 5 underworld holy world. Nie Tian frowned and said in a deep voice. The 5 underworld holy world. Black Emperor and Ren Wufeng were stunned when they heard this name. When Nie Tian saw the change in their expressions, he could not help but ask, is there something wrong with the 5 underworld holy world? Black Emperor's face was gloomy. He sighed and said, Master Beacon Emperor, you might not know this, but the 5 underworld holy world is near the underworld. However, this holy world is used by the other holy worlds to exile the cultivators. Exile the cultivators? Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. Then, he shook his head and smiled bitterly. It seems like it's another place that is not peaceful. Every holy world and every major faction had many cultivators who had committed crimes but were not executed. Instead, they were exiled to a place. The 5 underworld holy world was used to exile the sinful cultivators. The cultivators of the 5 underworld holy world are all people who have committed great crimes. They are all violent fugitives. Black Emperor looked at Nie Tian and said, moreover, the entire holy world is covered by a huge seal. One can only enter but not leave. Not leave? Nie Tian's face darkened again. It seemed like the situation was worse than he had imagined. Yes. Black Emperor nodded and said, rumor has it that the 5 underworld holy world only has one exit, and it is controlled by a force called the 5 underworld sect. However, this force is controlled by an even more mysterious force, and no one is allowed to leave the 5 underworld holy world. So that's how it is. Nye Tian smiled. At this moment, he was somewhat curious about the 5 underworld holy realm. Master Beacon Emperor, are you really going to the 5 underworld holy world? Black Emperor frowned and asked when he saw Nye Tian's intention. Since the 5 tribulations of the sky are in the 5 underworld holy world, how can I not go? Nye Tian smiled faintly and looked very calm. Black Emperor knew that Nye Tian was the kind of person who could not be shaken, so he did not say anything more. In the next few days, Nye Tian and the others temporarily stayed to recuperate. 5 days later, Nye Tian and the others returned to the Yin city. Originally, Ren Wufeng wanted to let Nye Tian stay a little longer, but Nye Tian was in a hurry to find the 5 tribulations of the sky, so he could not wait to leave after his martial body had almost recovered. At this moment, Nye Tian and the others arrived at a secret place in the Yin city under Black Emperor's lead. Nye Tian, Rui Qianyu, Cher, and Black Emperor stood in midair, surrounded by endless violent space-time turbulence. Boom, boom, boom. Turbulent flows of space-time violently attacked, like giant waves rolling about. Chapter 3747. Chapter 3742. Chapter 3742 Strange Tower, Sir Beacon Emperor, that dark whirlpool is the entrance to the 5 underworld sacred world. Are you guys ready? The Black Emperor glanced at Nye Tian and the others as he said in a deep voice. Nye Tian's gaze flickered, sweeping across Rui Qianyu and Cher. He said, Ruoyu, Cher, must you two come with me? Yes. The 2 girls nodded at the same time, extremely determined. Originally, Nye Tian planned to enter the 5 underworld holy world alone, but Rui Qianyu and Cher insisted on coming with him. He really had no choice but to work with the 3 of them. In fact, during the 5 days of recuperation, Nye Tian had been intimate with Rui Qianyu and Cher for a long time. However, Rui Qianyu and Cher were obviously worried about Nye Tian, so they insisted on going together. All right. Nye Tian nodded helplessly. He looked at Black Emperor and said, Let's go. Lord Beacon Emperor, I do not know much about the 5 underworld sacred world. I do not know what will happen after we enter the vortex. You must be prepared, Black Emperor said in a deep voice. He didn't want to go to the 5 underworld sacred world with Nye Tian and the others. After all, he was the master of the Black Martial Hall, and Nye Tian also objected to him going with them. The Black Tharch had yet to recover from her injuries. Even if they were to travel together, she would not be of much help to Nye Tian. Moreover, the Black Emperor was too strong and too conspicuous. Nye Tian smiled and nodded. Then, he walked towards the entrance of the 5 underworld sacred world. At this moment, he stepped into the dark vortex and immediately felt a boundless suction force appear, forcefully pulling him into a space-time tunnel. Rui Qianyu and Cher entered at almost the same time as Nye Tian, but they were pulled into another space-time channel. Oh no! Nye Tian's heart sank. He immediately realized that something was wrong and cried out in horror. However, in the next moment, his figure had already appeared in an unfamiliar world. Damn it! Nye Tianling stood in the void with a gloomy expression and growled. He had not expected the entrance to the 5 underworld sacred world to be like this. The space-time vortex was so chaotic that it actually scattered the cultivators who entered it. I hope Ruoyu and Cher haven't separated. Nye Tian became cold-muttered after a while. With Rui Qianyu and Cher's strength, they should be fine. However, the 2 of them were too beautiful and would become the focus of attention wherever they went. This made Nye Tian a little worried. Let's look for the 5 calamities in the sky first. Nye Tian thought for a while and finally decided to look for the 5 calamities in the sky first. At this moment, he did not know where Rui Qianyu and Cher were. He could only look for the 5 calamities in the sky first. At this moment, he observed the surrounding environment and found that he was in an endless desert. Yellow sand rolled around and danced wildly in the sky. It was extremely harsh. He once again sensed the picture of the 5 calamities in the sky to determine the position of himself and the 5 calamities in the sky. Then, he directly headed towards the 5 calamities in the sky. The hand scroll of the sky that Renwulfing gave him was very strange. Although he could open it, he could not see the entire hand scroll. He could only see the picture of the 5 calamities in the sky. Perhaps he did not understand the heart of the sky enough, so he could not see the entire hand scroll. 3 days later, Nye Tian was finally about to walk out of the desert in front of him. However, at this moment, he did not look too good. He was under the pressure of the celestial demon inverse inscription. In addition, he had been running non-stop for days. This made him feel very tired. All of a sudden, Nye Tian caught sight of an enormous pagoda standing in the middle of the desert in the distance, which looked like a giant. What was even more strange was that outside the giant tower, there was a stone sword. It was 1,000 meters tall. Although it looked very blunt, it gave people a special feeling of sharpness. Nye Tian looked at the giant tower in the distance, and could not help but feel a little strange. At this moment, he had a very strange feeling. He actually felt an inexplicable sense of closeness to the giant tower. Ah! At this moment, a shrill scream was suddenly heard from within the giant tower. Let's go and take a look. Nye Tian's eyes focused and his body moved instantly. Like a ray of light, he passed through the yellow sand and flew towards the giant tower. Bang! Just as he arrived outside the giant tower, before he could stand still, a dull sound was heard. Then, a blood-colored figure flew out. Nye Tian reacted quickly. He stretched out his hand and a vigorous yet soft force gushed out and caught the figure steadily. Murder, murder, murder! That person was greatly frightened, as if he had gone mad, shouting and shouting. Nye Tian took a step forward and caught the person. His eyes darkened and he asked, "What happened?" "You are..." The person looked at Nye Tian and then came to his senses. However, he could not say a word. Nye Tian frowned. He did not bother to ask him. He directly put the person on the ground, and then his body moved and directly entered the giant tower. At this moment, he suddenly smelled the dripping smell of blood. His expression changed involuntarily. Bang! Bang! Then, another 2 figures flew out. It was obvious that they had been hit by a huge force. Nye Tian released his sword intent. Like a giant hand, it caught the 2 people and helped them to stabilize. The 2 people were stunned. They glanced at Nye Tian and were so shocked that they could not speak. Nye Tian ignored the 2 people. He took a step forward and directly entered the tower. He could not help but frown when he saw the scene before him. There were corpses everywhere. The air was filled with the dripping smell of blood. Ha ha! Die, all of you! At this moment, a violent roar was heard from high up in the sky. In the midst of the blood, the roar was as brutal as a wild beast. Nye Tian suddenly raised his head and saw a saber-wielder holding a heavy saber. The saber-wielder laughed wildly as he slaughtered the surrounding swordsmen. The swordsmen were very weak. In front of the saber-wielder, they were like helpless lambs that could not withstand a single blow. Instantly, the air was filled with cries of pain and the air was filled with blood. Asshole! Nye Tian's eyes darkened. He let out a deep roar and his figure immediately charged into the sky. At the same time, high up in the sky. You little scums, how dare you call yourselves the guardians of the sky? In my eyes, you're all trash. The saber-wielder roared as he waved the heavy saber in his hand. Instantly, a powerful saber chi was released and rushed at the surrounding swordsmen like a raging wave. The guardians of the sky? Nye Tian was stunned when he heard the man's words. It seemed like these swordsmen were the guardians of the sky. Nye Tian was very familiar with this name. Could it be that this giant tower and these swordsmen are related to the heart of the sky? Nie Tian's eyes trembled as he thought to himself. In the next instant, his figure arrived. Sword intent was released from his body. Waves of vigorous sword intent were soft and gentle. They turned into a sword shield and protected the swordsman. Bang, bang, bang. Then, a series of muffled sounds came from the void. The place where the saber chi landed was blocked by the sword shield. Chapter 37:48. Madness of the Tyrant Blade. Nie Tian's figure suddenly appeared. His whole body was like a sharp sword, standing in the void, staring coldly at the warrior with the heavy blade. Hey! A tough guy has come. The warrior with the heavy blade saw Nie Tian, and his first reaction was surprise. Then, he smiled gloomily. There was no fear on his face, but an inexplicable excitement. The others looked at Nie Tian, as if they could not believe that someone would suddenly appear to protect them at this time. All of you back off. Nie Tian waved his hand slightly, his voice revealing insolence that could not be concealed. At this time, the warrior with the heavy blade smiled coldly and growled, "Let me see how tough you are." Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, the warrior with the overbearing blade in his hand slammed down. Suddenly, a blade wave appeared, rolling like a huge wave, pressing toward Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he used the sky sword. The sword's shadow was like a raging dragon, clashing head-on with the warrior with the overbearing blade. Bang! The blade and the sword collided, and a low muffled sound rang in the void, as if metal and stone had collided. Then, the waves of the blade and the sword rushed in all directions, wreaking havoc. Nie Tian and the warrior with the overbearing blade retreated at the same time and then stabilized themselves at the same time. Hey! Your sword will is a bit interesting. Overbearing blade looked at Nie Tian and could not help but be surprised. Obviously, he did not expect Nie Tian's sword will to be so strong. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and he was also surprised. This warrior with the overbearing blade had the strength of the 5th tier of the heavenly mandate realm. Among the opponents he had encountered, he was not too strong. However, this person's sword will was extremely domineering, heavy like an elephant, and the power of his blade could split mountains and seas. Not going to speak? Then have a taste of my flaming, overbearing blade. When Ba Dao saw that Nie Tian did not speak, his lips curled up into a cold smile. He chopped down with his saber at any moment. The saber intent in the air turned into a sea of flames, surging and blazing. In an instant, the surrounding space was set ablaze. Nie Tian's eyes darkened slightly. The sky sword slashed down in the void, and sword shadows surged out. Boom! Suddenly, the shadows of the saber and the sword collided in the air, forming a cross. The shadow of the sword and the shadow of the saber were torn apart at the same time. Several terrifying waves appeared in the air, crazily attacking each other. Bang! Bang! In the next moment, two muffled sounds rang out almost at the same time. Nie Tian and Ba Dao's figures flew back several thousand meters at the same time, heavily smashing into the stone wall of the giant tower, each leaving a human mark. The other swordsmen had already retreated to the sky, watching the battle below with shocked expressions. They obviously did not expect Nie Tian to be able to fight with Ba Dao to this extent. All right. Exciting. Again. At this time, Ba Dao growled. His eyes were bloodshot and he looked even more crazy. Nie Tian looked at Ba Dao and his eyes narrowed slightly. He sensed an extremely strong bloodline aura from Ba Dao. Boom! In the next moment, Ba Dao took a step forward, and his entire body released a wild saber will. An extremely strange aura shrouded his body, wrapping him up. This guy is so fierce. Nie Tian's eyes darkened slightly, and his expression changed. He was shocked. He could feel that Ba Dao's aura had increased several times in an instant. Battle energy. At the same time, Fat Cat's voice was heard, and she was very surprised. Battle energy? When Nie Tian heard this name, he could not help but be stunned. He had never heard of this kind of power. Kill! At this time, Ba Dao roared angrily. Like a ferocious beast in a state of rage, he slashed down with his saber. The void suddenly sank, as if the heaven and earth were about to be directly split. In the next moment, Nie Tian felt an incomparably violent strangling power coming from above his head, and his expression changed. Sacred heaven-defying sword, heaven and earth unite, yin and yang combine. Then, he growled and slashed with the sword in the sky, releasing a huge force. Bang! The saber and the sword collided again, and the sound of an explosion was heard. Endless wild waves surged violently. Nie Tian's figure suddenly retreated, and when he stabilized himself, there was a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Ba Dao's aura was too strong, and that kind of tyrannical saber will seem to be able to destroy everything. Silver-haired boy, is that all you have? That's not strong enough. Then, Ba Dao's voice sounded again, resounding in the void. The heaven and earth shook violently, and a huge saber shadow appeared, setting off endless wild waves, and pressed down on Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and the soul of the sky in his body was activated. His entire body's sword momentum soared like a volcanic eruption. Boom! Then, he directly slashed down with his sword. Everywhere the sword shadow passed, endless wild waves were split open, and Ba Dao exploded. Bang! A muffled sound was heard, and Ba Dao's figure was sent flying, directly smashing into the stone wall of the giant tower. The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched coldly. He took a step forward, and his sword momentum soared to the sky. His whole body was like a huge sword, standing horizontally in the sky. Bang! But at this moment, an explosion sounded from the stone wall of the giant tower, and Ba Dao's figure actually rushed out. Apart from some small wounds on his body, his aura did not weaken at all. This guy's martial body was very strong, and he only suffered minor injuries after taking a blow from Nie Tian. Now, is it hard enough? Nie Tian was surprised, but he was very arrogant and provocative. Very good. Ba Dao looked at Nie Tian and laughed wildly. I like hard edges. Boom. As his voice fell, he took a step forward, and his whole body's saber momentum soared again. Battle energy again. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and his heart sank. Ba Dao unexpectedly released the same kind of battle energy as before, which made his whole body's aura even crazier and more terrifying. Come on, let's have a good fight. Ba Dao laughed wildly. His long hair fluttered in the air, and he was very violent. In the next moment, his figure instantly moved, and he directly slashed down with his saber. The saber's shadow was extremely violent, and in the void, there was the sound of raging waves beating on the shore. Water! Nie Tian's eyes narrowed, and he could not help but exclaim in surprise. Just now, what Ba Dao released was obviously the saber essence of the fire attribute, but now he released the saber essence of the water attribute, which was really strange. Compared to before, this saber was more violent and vigorous, and the kind of aura that could break through everything was extremely terrifying. Ba Dao was even crazier than what Nie Tian had expected. Boom! At this time, Nie Tian brandished his sword in the sky, and his sword slashed wildly. The sword's shadow was like a mountain, and it moved with a loud bang, oppressing the void. Boom! Boom! In the void, the saber's shadow was as vigorous as an elephant, and the sword's shadow was as fierce as a dragon. The battle between the saber and the sword exploded, and suddenly the wind and clouds were frightened, and the sky and earth changed color. Chapter 3749. Even more ferocious boom. 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 PSSSD. 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 Ear-piercing noises reverberated in the void. Heaven and earth fell into chaos. After some time, the void became clear again. Two figures appeared. They were Nie Tian and Ba Dao. Both of them were injured and covered in blood. It was as if they had just walked out from a rain of blood. Silver-haired kid, I have to admit that your horn is really strong. Ba Dao stood in the air. Saber will surged around him, and the wounds on his body healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. He had not expected Nie Tian's strength to be so strong. It had far exceeded his expectations. "You are strong too," Nie Tianling replied. He was even more shocked. Although Ba Dao was injured, he felt that after several clashes, his aura did not decrease at all. Instead, it was even more terrifying than before. It seemed that Ba Dao's bloodline power was special. Every time he released it, his aura would become stronger. "Humph." Ba Dao coldly smiled and said, "Little Silver, the battle between us has just begun. Since you like to save these scumbags, then you can accompany them in death." Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, Ba Dao took another step forward. The saber will in his body was released violently. Suddenly, countless saber shadows appeared in the void. They were as fast as lightning and as powerful as the mountains and rivers. Boom, boom, boom. Nie Tian's ears buzzed. He felt that the space around him was being pulled taut by a strong force. It was as if the space was going to collapse at any time. Ba Dao's move was extremely terrifying. He had unleashed the power of his saber will to the extreme. Nie Tian's eyebrows furrowed as his face tightened. It was impossible for him to activate the divine demon inverse mark at this moment. Furthermore, due to the terrifying pressure of the divine demon inverse mark, his combat power was weaker than before. It seemed that he could only use the forbidden star soul or the sword formation in the sky. However, he did not do so. Swoosh, swoosh. In an instant, Nie Tian reacted. The extreme demon annihilation seal appeared at the corner of his eyes. 2 surges of eye power appeared and attacked the endless saber waves. 9 limits of the starry sky, annihilation of the sun. Immediately after, the sky sword in his hand trembled and stabbed forward. The shadow of the sword was like a giant snake, whistling madly. Whoosh, whoosh. In the next moment, 2 extreme demon annihilation seals descended. Like 2 giant hands, they forcefully tore apart the saber wave. Boom. Then, the shadow of the sword suddenly fell and went against the saber waves, directly attacking the yellow dragon, oppressing the saber waves and causing them to surge to both sides. Ba Dao's eyes narrowed. He did not expect Nie Tian to be so smart. He could see the weakness of his saber wave in one glance. It turned out that this saber wave was like a saber array, and the 2 places that Nie Tian used the extreme devil annihilation seal to tear apart were like the 2 eyes of the saber array, supporting each other. When the eyes of the array were destroyed, the power of the saber wave was greatly reduced. Then, Nie Tian attacked again with his sword and broke through the saber wave. While Domineering Blade was still in a state of shock, something even more unexpected happened. Nie Tian's figure suddenly moved. Like a streak of light, he dashed directly towards him. Voila! Then, before Ba Dao could even react, several shackles suddenly appeared in front of him, instantly restraining him. Damn it! Ba Dao's body shook and he roared. His battle chi was released crazily, trying to break through the shackles. However, he found that all his strength was restrained. Even if he released his blood chi, he would not be able to activate the power of his martial body. Humph, you are trapped by my heavenly shackles and you still want to resist? Nie Tian's body landed next to Ba Dao and he smiled coldly. You! Ba Dao's eyes were bloodshot, like an enraged beast. He clenched his fists tightly, but he could not say a word. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined that he would be captured by Nie Tian. What about me? Nie Tian smiled slightly, looking extremely provocative. At this moment, he did not want to kill Ba Dao, but he was very interested in the latter's blood chi. It's a pity that such a talented swordsman like you is in cahoots with these sorcerers. It's despicable. At this time, Ba Dao coldly scolded. He raised his head and said, "Kill me!" Sorcerers? Nie Tian was stunned. He suddenly looked at the swordsman above him and asked, "You said they are sorcerers?" Ba Dao suddenly raised his head, his eyes were bloodshot, and he stared at Nie Tian coldly and roared, "They collect the blood qi of young girls to cultivate their sword essence. They kill innocent people and commit all kinds of crimes. If they are not sorcerers, what are they?" Huh! Nie Tian's face darkened. Judging from Ba Dao's expression, it seemed that what he said was not false. "Sir, what he said is false. He indiscriminately killed the people of Sky Sword Pagoda." At this time, the group of swordsmen who had been watching the battle came over. One of them looked a little timid and said to Nie Tian, "Really?" Nie Tian's expression suddenly turned grim, and his eyes shone with a cold light. Like two sharp blades, they were so sharp that they seemed to be able to pierce through a person. His face instantly changed when he scanned that person with his divine sense. Really? That person's eyes suddenly trembled, and his voice began to tremble. "Really?" Nie Tian's eyes suddenly narrowed, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Immediately, the heavenly law shackle was released from Ba Dao, and then a heavenly law shackle moved in the air and directly pierced that swordsman. That swordsman was so scared that his face changed. He screamed in horror, but then he could not make a sound. "You lied to me, and you will die a painful death." Nie Tian's eyes suddenly trembled, and he said in a cold tone, his whole person seemed incomparably solemn, and his killing intent was extremely strong. I was wrong. That person's body was dripping with blood, and he was so scared that he shouted, "We just killed some ordinary girls." Ordinary girls? Nie Tian's eyes suddenly darkened. He suddenly stepped forward, and directly approached that person. His eyes were like a pair of evil wolves, and he said in a deep voice, "Compared to them, you are very noble, right?" That person was shocked, and just as he was about to speak, he found that his chest had been directly torn. Swoosh! The next moment, the heavenly law shackle shook in the air, and there was a bloody scene. That person was directly torn into meat paste. "Quick, run!" The other swordsmen were frightened by the scene in front of them, and immediately reacted. They shouted and scattered in all directions. They did not expect that Nie Tian was even more ferocious than the Ba Dao cultivator. "Run!" Nie Tian's eyes darkened, and the corner of his mouth curled up into a cold smile, and he roared like a wild beast, "All of you die for me!" As soon as his voice fell, 9 heavenly law shackles directly swept out in the surrounding void, and everywhere they passed, there was a bloody scene, extremely tragic. Chapter 3750. Chapter 3745. 5 Tribulations Force, huh? The bloody scene in the void stunned the tyrant blade martialist. He exclaimed in surprise as he looked at Nie Tian in a different light. He hadn't expected that Nie Tian would be able to kill all of them in a split second. He had thought that Nie Tian was in cahoots with the people from the Sky Sword Pagoda. However, it seemed like that was not the case. "Friend, I misunderstood you. I'm sorry," Nie Tian said sincerely to the tyrant blade martialist. "It seems like I also misunderstood you." The tyrant blade martialist was also very pleased. He laughed and said, "Brother, you were reckless, but your strength was not fake at all. If we had fought to the death just now, I'm afraid I would have died at your hands. It was just a trick." Nie Tian smiled and nodded. The tyrant blade martialist was extremely strong. If they had fought head-on, the outcome of the battle would have been unknown. Moreover, Nie Tian could also tell that the tyrant blade martialist had not revealed his full strength. A loss is a loss. Tong Dakian can afford to lose. The tyrant blade martialist laughed heartily and asked, "Brother, how should I address you?" Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded slightly. He looked around and asked, "Brother Tong, what's going on?" "Hey, I just came to the 5 Underworld Sacred World." Tong Dakian laughed and said, "Not long ago, someone told me that there is a force called the Sky Sword Pagoda here that specializes in collecting the blood qi of young girls to cultivate evil sword intents. I'm a busybody, so I asked around and confirmed that the Sky Sword Pagoda is indeed an evil force. Therefore, I couldn't help but start a massacre. Unfortunately, I met you, Brother Nye. Sorry for making a fool of myself. Tong Dakian laughed heartily after he finished speaking. He was very magnanimous. Brother Tong is upright and upright. You are a true hero. I was too rash and almost made a mistake. Nye Tian could not help but smile, feeling a little embarrassed. It's just a misunderstanding. Let's just talk about it. Tong Dakian laughed and asked, Brother Nye, you've just arrived at the 5 Underworld Sacred World, right? Yes. Nye Tian nodded. His eyes flickered as he asked, Brother Tong, did you just say that this pagoda is called the Sky Sword Pagoda? Yes. Tong Dakian nodded heavily and pointed at the corpses around him. These demonic swordsmen claimed to be the guardians of the sky, but they were secretly doing something shameful. It's really a pity for the name Sword Pagoda in the sky. Nye Tian couldn't help smiling bitterly. Tong Dakian clearly didn't know that he was the ruler of the sky. Nye Tian vaguely sensed that the Sword Pagoda in the sky in front of him was closely related to the heart of the sky. It was a pity that he had killed all the swordsmen in a moment of rage. Little boy, why are you sneaking around? Come out. At this moment, Tong Dakian's eyes suddenly darkened. He let out a low roar and released a wave of saber chi, which directly smashed the stone wall of the sword pagoda behind him. Then, a young swordsman walked out from the cave in the stone wall. He was trembling with fear, and it was obvious that he was terrified. Huh! Nye Tian looked at the swordsman and couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. He hadn't sensed the swordsman's existence, but Tong Dakian had. It seemed that Tong Dakian had extraordinary perception. Please, please don't kill me. I just joined the Sky Sword Pagoda. They were the ones who absorbed the blood of the young girls. I didn't absorb any of them, the swordsman said in a trembling voice. He couldn't help but retreat. Is that so? Tong Dakian sneered and stretched out his hand. A huge force swept out and directly lifted the swordsman up. He was about to crush the swordsman to death in the next moment. Brother Tong, wait! At this moment, Nye Tian's voice suddenly sounded and stopped Tong Dakian. Brother Nye, what's wrong? Tong Dakian couldn't help but stare at Nye Tian and ask. I have some questions to ask him. Nye Tian stretched out his hand and stopped Tong Dakian, indicating that he should put the swordsman down. Although Tong Dakian was a little unwilling, he still put the swordsman down. Thank you, Lord. The swordsman looked at Nye Tian and hurriedly expressed his gratitude. I'll ask you some questions now. Answer them honestly. If I'm satisfied, you can live. Nye Tian's face was gloomy and cold. Yes. The swordsman nodded repeatedly. He didn't dare to disobey. Where did the Sky Sword Pagoda come from? Nye Tian frowned and asked in a deep voice. The swordsman looked a little doubtful and uncertain at the same time. He said cautiously, I just came to the Sky Sword Pagoda not long ago. I heard that this sword pagoda was built by the Lord of the Sky a long time ago to seal some kind of power. Lord of the Sky? When Nye Tian heard this name, he couldn't help but frown and his expression changed. What bullsh *T Lord of the Sky? Building a broken sword pagoda to harm people? Tong Dakian sneered. Then, he noticed that Nye Tian's expression was strange. His eyes widened and he asked in surprise, Brother Nye, don't tell me you know this Lord of the Sky? No. Nye Tian frowned and shook his head. He didn't want Tong Dakian to know that he was the current Lord of the Sky. As expected, the Sky Sword Pagoda was related to the heart of the sky. It turned out that it was built by the former Lord of the Sky. And this swordsman said that the Sky Sword Pagoda was used to seal some kind of power. This made Nye Tian even more curious. At this moment, he had a bold guess in his mind. Could the Sky Sword Pagoda be used to seal the power of the 5 calamities in the sky? This idea made him a little excited, but he didn't show it. Instead, He looked at the swordsman and continued to ask, "Why does the swordsman of the sky sword pagoda want to absorb the blood chi of young girls?" "Sir, please follow me." The swordsman didn't directly answer Nyetian. Instead, he moved and led the way. Nyetian's eyes couldn't help but narrow. Then, he followed the swordsman with Tong Dakian. The three of them arrived outside the sword pagoda in the sky and stood next to the giant stone sword outside the pagoda. "Sir, this is the stone sword." The swordsman pointed at the stone sword and said to Nyetian. Nyetian frowned and his expression suddenly changed. The shock in his heart couldn't be any greater. He actually felt a very terrifying sword essence in the giant stone sword, and this sword essence made the soul of the sky in his body inexplicably active. "Sir, the sword essence emitted from the stone sword must be cultivated with the blood chi of young girls. In order to cultivate the sword essence, teacher and senior brothers collect the blood chi of young girls." The swordsman looked at Nyetian and said in a deep voice. At this moment, Nyetian was like a stone, staring at the giant stone sword with a pair of blazing eyes. He felt that the soul of the sky was becoming more and more active, almost to the point of going berserk. Chapter 37:51. Chapter 37:46. Chapter 37:46 Boundless Calamity Sword Intent. Nyetian looked at the huge stone sword in front of him, his eyes trembling slightly. His heart was filled with indescribable excitement and passion. He had never imagined that he would encounter the 5 calamities of the sky here. But strangely, according to the records on the 5 calamities picture in the sky, the 5 calamities of the sky were not here. "Brother Nye, are you all right?" Tong Dakian asked with a frown when he saw Nyetian's unusual expression. "I'm fine." Nyetian forced himself to calm down, then looked at the swordsman and asked, "Has the sword pagoda in the sky always been in this place?" The swordsman was stunned for a moment, not quite understanding what Nyetian meant, and nodded in response. "Strange." Nyetian was puzzled, and his eyes became strange. "Brother Nye, your body." At this time, Tong Dakian suddenly sensed something, and his expression changed. He looked at Nyetian in astonishment for a few seconds, then exclaimed, "What power is this?" "This." The swordsman also reacted at this time, and with a strange cry, he was so scared that his face turned pale, and he immediately retreated. "Huh!" Nyetian was surprised, and only then did he see that his body was surging with a layer of blazing light, like a golden sunset, enveloping him, making him look radiant. "Soul of the sky!" Nyetian's expression changed, and he couldn't help but exclaim. At this time, he suddenly felt that the soul of the sky in his body seemed to be boiling, constantly releasing blazing golden light. Rays of light were released like dense smoke, like a slowly burning flame. This power, what is this? How can it be so powerful?" Tong Dakian's eyes were wide open, as if his eyeballs were about to pop out. While he was shocked, he subconsciously retreated. He faintly felt that something terrible might happen to Nyetian. Under the influence of Nyetian's power, his bloodline fighting chi seemed to be going out of control, and that kind of violent aura made him very uneasy. Boom! At this moment, the blazing light on Nyetian's body grew stronger and stronger. It was no longer as gentle as it had been before, but more like a raging inferno that surged in all directions. It made him feel like he was standing in a sea of fire. This terrifying power became more and more powerful, and it spread thousands of meters. Blazing lights appeared in space like tongues of fire, seeming to tear the heavens and earth apart. When the swordsman saw this scene, his little face froze in fear. He stood there in a daze, completely speechless. Bang! At this moment, a muffled explosion rang out. A crack had actually appeared on the huge stone sword from the inside. Damn it! Why can't I control the soul of the sky? The soul of the sky around Nyetian's body went wild, but he was very nervous. At this time, the power of the soul of the sky seemed to be out of control, completely out of his control. Tian had yet to figure out what was going on. Bang! 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 Following that, as the aura of the soul of the sky was released, the huge stone sword seemed to have sensed something and began to crack. In almost the blink of an eye, the huge stone sword was covered with countless cracks, and as the cracks continued to spread, the entire stone sword became shaky and could collapse at any time. This is... At this moment, the swordsman seemed to realize something. He looked at the stone sword in horror, trembled a few times, and then looked at Tian and shouted. He is, however. He was so frightened that he couldn't speak. What is this? What is he? Tong Dakian's eyes darkened. His figure moved, and he came to the swordsman's side, stretched out his hand, and directly lifted the swordsman up. Because of Tong Dakian's arrival, the swordsman calmed down a lot and shouted while pointing at Tian, He is the master of the sky. The master of the sky. Tong Dakian was stunned at first when he heard those words, but he immediately reacted and shouted like thunder. He is the master of the sky who left behind the sword pagoda in the sky. Impossible, this is impossible, absolutely impossible. In the next moment Tong Dakian's eyes widened, and he shook his head repeatedly and said to himself, He is younger than me, how can he be the master of the sky? I don't know either. The swordsman was stunned and shook his head. With Tong Dakian by his side, he felt a lot more at ease. Bang bang bang. Boom. At this moment there was an explosion on the huge stone sword, and in the end, the entire stone sword could no longer withstand it and suddenly collapsed. Immediately, stone powder flew in the air, and a cloud of dust appeared. What is that? In the sky full of dust, Tong Dakian saw a golden light, and he cried out in shock. At the same time, Tian seemed to have sensed something, and his eyes burned with passion as he stared at the golden light. He was so shocked that he could not speak. The golden light was the power sealed in the stone sword, and it was a sword intent. Its sword intent. What a terrifying sword intent! Tong Dakian immediately reacted and shouted. His eyes, which were already very big, suddenly became twice their normal size. It was obvious that he was extremely shocked. He had never seen such a terrifying sword intent. Tong Dakian had also seen powerful swordsmen, but although the sword intent of those swordsmen was far more powerful than the golden sword intent before him, it did not have the terrifying aura that this golden sword intent contained. The golden sword intent condensed into a golden sword shadow that floated in the air like a flame. Its aura was extremely terrifying, as if it was the ruler of this world, and the entire world would be torn apart with a slight movement. Tong Dakian did not expect such a terrifying sword intent to exist in this world. In the next moment, an even more shocking scene took place. Bang! The golden sword intent seemed to have sensed something and vibrated in the air, unleashing a terrifying wave of sword intent. The entire world shook, as if it was about to collapse. Following this, the golden sword intent spun in the air and shrouded Tian, instantly wrapping him up. Tong Dakian was stunned, and he was shocked to the point of being speechless. Tian was even more surprised, as he was unable to resist the sword intent. In the next moment, the golden sword intent vibrated violently and surged into Tian's body. Tian's eyes flickered. In an instant, he felt as if he was enduring thousands of sword intents. The endless sword intents pierced into his body like countless sharp blades, and in an instant, they merged perfectly with his original sword intent. Chapter 3752. The Strength of the Tribulation. Boundless Tribulation Sword Intent. Tian subconsciously realized that the sword intent that had merged with his body was the Boundless Tribulation Sword Intent. He instantly realized that the 5 tribulations in the sky were the 5 sword intents. The heart of the sky was also known as the heart of the heavens and earth sword. It was a type of power that used the sword as the heart. It was not surprising that the 5 tribulations in the sky were sword intents. In an instant Nye Tian understood. His eyes shone with a blazing light, and he seemed to be extremely excited. He did not expect the boundless tribulation sword intent to automatically merge with him. After merging with the boundless tribulation sword intent, his sword intent had risen to a more powerful realm. At this moment, he sensed the sword intent and froze. He could not react for a long time. His sword Tao realm had risen from the 4th heavens of sword aura to the 7th heavens of sword aura in an instant. After merging with the boundless tribulation sword intent, Nye Tian's sword Tao realm had risen by 3 levels in an instant. 3 levels, a full 3 levels. Nye Tian could not believe that the boundless tribulation sword intent was so powerful. At this moment, Tong Dakian and the swordsman stared at Nye Tian in a daze. They could not react for a long time. The shock in their hearts was indescribable. Tong Dakian couldn't believe that Nye Tian had actually absorbed such a terrifyingly powerful sword intent. How could Nye Tian's martial physique withstand such a terrifying sword intent? Brother Nye, are you alright? Tong Dakian finally reacted after a long time. He took a step forward and asked cautiously. I'm fine. Nye Tian smiled faintly. His body emitted an extremely sharp sword intent aura. He looked extremely sharp, as if he could tear the heavens and earth apart with a single move. Tong Dakian looked at Nye Tian and suddenly thought of something. His eyes sank and he asked cold, Nye Tian, who are you? All of a sudden, he realized that Nye Tian's identity had to be extraordinary. Otherwise, it would have been impossible to fuse such a powerful sword intent in an instant. Perhaps, as the swordsman beside him said, Nye Tian was really the legendary Lord of the Sky. Brother Tong, I can't tell you too much, but please believe that I'm definitely not a bad person. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as he spoke with a serious expression. Not a bad guy. Tong Dakian let out a low roar, and his expression became extremely cold. His entire person seemed to have instantly turned into an iceberg, exuding an extremely cold and gloomy aura. It's a different kind of saber intent. Nye Tian's expression changed. He did not expect Tong Dakian to emit a completely different aura of saber intent. Previously, when he fought with Tong Dakian, the latter had used the fire attribute saber intent and the water attribute saber intent. At this moment, Tong Dakian released an ice-attributed saber intent. This was too strange. Tong Dakian was actually able to release 3 different saber intents, which was indeed extremely rare. Nye Tian, do you think I'll believe you? Tong Dakian smiled cold and said, This swordsman said that you're the Lord of the Sky. How do you explain that? I'm indeed the Lord of the Sky, but I'm not the Lord of the Sky that he mentioned. Nye Tian frowned and said in a deep voice. He did not like to explain too much to others, but he felt that Tong Dakian was a good person, so he was willing to explain. Then how do you explain the sword intent that you absorbed just now? Tong Dakian said with a gloomy expression. The sword intent was so powerful, and the swordsman of the sky sword pagoda needs to absorb the blood chi of young girls to cultivate, but you were able to absorb it directly. Isn't that too strange? Boom. After saying that, Tong Dakian took a step forward. His eyes were filled with murderous intent, and his entire body emitted an extremely terrifying saber intent. It was incomparably forceful, causing his entire body to be as heavy as a mountain. Every single move he made would shake the heavens and earth. I'm the Lord of the Sky. That sword intent is connected to some kind of power in my body, so I can absorb it. Nye Tian frowned and said in a deep voice. So, you're also a member of the Sky Sword Pagoda, right? Tong Dakian said cold with a gloomy expression. The Sky Sword Pagoda was left behind by the previous Lord of the Sky. It has nothing to do with me, Nye Tian said with a gloomy expression. Humph, is that so? Tong Dakian sneered. It was obvious that he did not believe Nye Tian's explanation. In his opinion, Nye Tian was the sword pagoda in the sky. Even if he was not, he was closely related to the sword pagoda in the sky. I'm not satisfied with the battle just now. Why don't we fight again? In the next moment, Tong Dakian took a step forward. The saber intent in his body surged and was released with an earth-shattering force. Kill! As soon as he finished speaking, he made his move. The tyrant's saber slashed in the air, and the powerful saber intent surged in the void. Suddenly, a saber shadow that looked like an ice mountain appeared. The entire world was filled with frost intent, and it was bone-chilling. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and the sky sword slashed out coldly in the air. The sword shadow whistled, and the sound of the sword pierced through the clouds and cracked the rocks. Boom! In the next moment, the saber and the sword collided, and there was a roar in the void. The saber intent and the sword intent collided in the void, and a terrifying airwave rolled out, as if the world was about to be engulfed. Boom, boom, boom. The air of frost and the sharp sword intent mixed together, and rushed out like rolling waves. Everywhere they passed, the space was frozen. Bang! Following that, a deafening explosion could be heard. The entire world trembled as the frozen space exploded, as if the heavens were collapsing and the earth was cracking apart. Nie Tian and Tong Dakian's figures retreated a few thousand meters at the same time, and then stood still at the same time. They were like two strange mountains, one fierce and the other cold. Nie Tian, your strength is indeed much stronger than before. Tong Dakian's eyes were extremely gloomy, and he spoke Nie Tian coldly. He did not expect that the sword intent that Nie Tian had just merged with would be able to unleash such a terrifying power. Nie Tian's eyes trembled slightly, and he was extremely surprised. He was also shocked. The power of the Howran sword intent was much stronger than he had imagined. He had only casually executed the previous attack, but it was on par with Tong Dakian's. It was really beyond his expectations. Nie Tian, I don't care who you are, you're going to die today. Tong Dakian took a step forward and let out a domineering roar. His entire body unleashed a terrifying saber intent, and at the same time, he began to unleash his bloodline battle chi, which pushed his saber intent to an unprecedented level. Brother Tong, if you want to fight, then bring it on. Nie Tian's eyes darkened slightly. He had a strange feeling that Tong Dakian was not as simple as he had thought. In his opinion, Tong Dakian was not a stupid person. He was surprised that Tong Dakian was not as simple as he had thought. Chapter 3753. The Battle of the Saber and Sword. Nie Tian stood in the void with a pair of cold eyes. He vaguely sensed that Tong Dakian wasn't as simple as he seemed. Great! Tong Dakian let out a thunderous roar as his entire body unleashed a raging battle aura that turned dark red in the void, making him look even more terrifying. Die! Tong Dakian let out a furious roar and slashed down with his tyrant saber. The force of the slash perfectly displayed the power of his saber intent, as if he was going to split the sky and earth in half. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as his figure spun in the void and slashed with the sky sword. The shadow of the sword caused the surrounding void to sink, and the momentum of the sky and earth was directly changed. The two exchanged blows once again, and this time, it was even fiercer than the first time. Kaboom! In the next instant, the sword and the saber collided in the void, causing the sky and earth to tremble. Following this, a violent force spread out and turned into raging waves that spread across the void. Nie Tian and Tong Dakian's figures retreated at the same time, each retreating a few thousand meters away. Nie Tian, I didn't expect that the surge of power just now would have such a great effect on you. Tong Dakian stabilized his body. His eyes were extremely gloomy as the battle aura in his body surged, as if it was going to overturn the sky and earth. Tong Dakian, your strength is also much stronger than before. Nie Tianling chuckled and said in a deep voice, I would like to see how strong your bloodline battle aura is. You actually know that my bloodline is the power of battle aura. You're really not that simple. Tong Dakian's eyes darkened as his expression turned extremely stern. The tyrant's saber swept across the void, and the sound of the saber resonated in the void like the mournful cry of a dragon or elephant. The power that erupted in an instant was earth-shattering. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as he suddenly felt a crazy pressure coming at him. It seemed like Tong Dakian's battle aura had caused his entire body to enter a violent and overbearing state, which was able to stimulate the power in his saber intent. Boom! At this moment, the shadow of the saber suddenly descended like a mountain, suppressing Nie Tian with the force of 10,000 caddies. 12 heaven-slaying sword formation, break! Nie Tian's eyes narrowed and the corner of his mouth twitched. The sword will in his entire body went berserk. 12 heaven-slaying sword shadows appeared like raging sea dragons. They rushed out and forcefully blocked the saber shadows. Then, they suddenly turned in the void and forcefully shattered the saber shadows. Boom! In the next instant, the 12 heaven-slaying sword shadows condensed into an even more violent and enormous sword shadow. Like a towering mountain, it pressed down on Tong Dakian. Tong Dakian's pupils contracted when he saw the scene before him. He did not expect Nie Tian to be so terrifying, forcefully shattering his saber shadows and trying to kill him. Saber intent, total annihilation. However, Shao Chen did not panic. Instead, his eyes sank as he shouted, and the tyrant's saber appeared again. A terrifying saber intent surged out like a tsunami, condensing into saber images that swept through everything. Boom! The saber and the sword collided once again, resulting in a crazy impact in the void. The saber light and the sword glow flickered like sharp blades, while a huge vortex appeared in the void, devouring everything in its path. Nie Tian and Tong Dakian's figures hurriedly retreated once again. Nie Tian used the wings on his back to stabilize his figure in the void. A trace of blood leaked out from the corner of his mouth, but his eyes were filled with a strange excitement. He did not expect the boundless calamity sword intent to improve his strength so much, allowing him to fight evenly with Tong Dakian without activating the spirit of the sky. Besides, the strength that Tong Dakian had displayed was a lot stronger than before. Tong Dakian had indeed made a mistake in the first battle, allowing him to be captured alive by Nie Tian. Nie Tian, you're worthy of my full strength. At that moment, Tong Dakian let out a deep roar. The battle aura surrounding his body surged once again, pushing his saber intent to an even stronger level. Boom! At that moment, the battle aura around his body surged violently like a blazing scarlet flame. What a powerful battle aura! Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as his heart was filled with astonishment. Tong Dakian's current battle aura was too terrifying. If he had used this battle aura against Nie Tian in the previous battle, even if Nie Tian activated the spirit of the sky, he would still be no match for Tong Dakian. Nie Tian, stop playing with him. If his battle aura turns black, he will go berserk. The fat cat's voice was heard all of a sudden. Go berserk? Nie Tian was startled for a moment, but he immediately realized that the bloodline battle aura would also affect Tong Dakian's divine sense. Since that's the case, let's settle this with a single strike. Nie Tian's eyes darkened as the corners of his mouth twitched. Suddenly, a powerful force was unleashed within his body, causing the sword intent in his body to surge. Alright. Tong Dakian was not afraid at all when he sensed the change in Nie Tian's sword intent. Instead, he let out a deep roar as the Overlord saber in his hand burned with battle aura. Saber intent, one-step kill. In the next moment, he let out a thunderous roar as the Overlord saber swept across the sky. The tyrannical saber intent surged violently as if it was going to incinerate this part of the world. Boom! Following that, the saber intent condensed in the void and a scarlet saber shadow appeared. It was like a sea of flames that pressed down on Nie Tian. Nie Tian could feel the burning pain from the blazing flames even though he was tens of thousands of meters away. It was obvious how powerful Tong Dakian's saber was. Sacred heaven-defying sword, heaven and earth as one, yin and yang as one. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at the saber's shadow in the air. A cold smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he spoke in a deep voice. Immediately after, the clear sky sword slashed out in the air. The sword's shadow roared like a dragon, surging violently. Boom! Boom! In the sky, the saber's shadow and the sword's shadow were like two primordial dragons, roaring crazily and stirring up the power of heaven and earth, causing the clouds and wind to tremble. Boom! In the next moment, the saber and the sword collided with each other, causing a loud explosion in the void. The surging power raged like a sandstorm, burying and devouring everything in its path. Before Nie Tian and Tong Dakian could react, they were instantly devoured by the raging wave. The space within 100,000 meters was chaotic, as if it was the end of the world. After a long time, the world began to clear up, and two figures slowly appeared. They were Nie Tian and Tong Dakian. At this moment, Tong Dakian was covered in blood. It was obvious that he was severely injured. Nie Tian, on the other hand, stood in midair like an incomparably sharp sword. Without a doubt, Nie Tian had won the final clash. You, Blard. Tong Dakian looked at Nie Tian with trembling eyes. He was about to say something when he spurted out a mouthful of blood. Chapter 3754. Chapter 3749. Making a deal. Tong Dakian looked at Nie Tian, his eyes full of confusion, unwillingness, and doubt. He could not imagine that Nie Tian's strength had skyrocketed to such a terrifying level after absorbing the sword intent. Tong Dakian, you should be able to tell me your real identity now, right? Nie Tianling smiled coldly and moved to Tong Dakian's side. What do you want? Tong Dakian suddenly sensed the killing intent in Nie Tian's eyes. He could not help but panic for the first time. I just want to know who you are. Nie Tian smiled coldly as killing intent shot out of his eyes. Like two sharp blades, Tong Dakian felt a sense of pressure that he had never felt before. What do you mean? Tong Dakian's eyes trembled, and his tongue trembled. He did not show fear on his face, but panic. To be more precise, it was anxiety or worry. It was as if he was afraid of something. Do you really think I'm a fool? Nie Tianling smiled coldly and said in a deep voice, You're so persistent in wanting to fight me. Is it really because of my relationship with the Sky Sword Pagoda? Tong Dakian panicked even more. His eyes trembled, and he began to avoid Nie Tian. You didn't come to the Sky Sword Pagoda just to get rid of evil for the people, right? Nie Tian's eyes were gloomy and cold. What other purpose do you have? Tong Dakian's eyes trembled even more. He shook his head and said, I can't say. You're really not simple. Nie Tian's eyes suddenly darkened, and a strange light flashed in them. You're here for the Howren sword intent, right? Perhaps the swordsmen of the Sky Sword Pagoda were not good people. But Tong Dakian's purpose here was definitely not just to kill these swordsmen. If there was anything in the Sky Sword Pagoda that interested Tong Dakian, it would be the Howren sword intent. However, Tong Dakian was a bladesman. It seemed like he had no use for the vast tribulation sword intent. Looking at Nie Tian, Tong Dakian's expression suddenly changed and he asked in a deep voice, Since you already know, why are you still asking me? At this moment, he was much calmer and regained his previous toughness. What does a saber wielder need sword intent for? Nie Tian's lips curled into a strange smile as he asked coldly. Save them, Tong Dakian replied solemnly. Save who? Nie Tian frowned. He couldn't help but be surprised. It seemed that the matter was more complicated than he had thought. My sister. Tong Dakian looked at Nie Tian and said in a deep voice, She was captured. The person who captured her said that as long as I could get the sword intent sealed in the stone sword outside the sword pagoda in the sky, he would let her go. I see. The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched and he said with a smile, "Looks like there's someone else besides me who wants the 5 tribulations of the sky." "Nye Tian, who are you?" Tong Dakian's expression suddenly changed. His eyes were cold as he stared at Nye Tian and asked, "Are you related to the people who kidnapped my sister?" "I've told you that I'm the master of the sky. However, I'm not the master of the sky that person mentioned. I'm the next master of the sky after that person." Nye Tian smiled faintly and didn't explain too much. Tong Dakian's eyes darkened and he asked coldly, "Then, are you related to the sword pagoda in the sky and the force that kidnapped my sister?" "No." Nye Tian shook his head and said, "This is my first time in the 5 underworld sacred world. I'm here to get the 5 tribulations of the sky." Tong Dakian obviously didn't believe Nye Tian and asked cold, "How do you prove it?" Nye Tian smiled faintly and said, "I don't need proof, and I don't need you to believe me." Tong Dakian frowned and was momentarily speechless. It seemed that Nye Tian didn't need to explain anything to him. At this moment, Nye Tian's eyes narrowed and the corner of his mouth curled into a smile. "Brother Tong, why don't we make a deal?" "What deal?" Tong Dakian was stunned for a moment. Nye Tian could kill him right now. Why would he make a deal with him? Nye Tian smiled faintly and said, "Take me to the people who kidnapped your sister, and I'll help you rescue her. How about it?" This. Tong Dakian was stunned. He looked at Nye Tian and didn't know what to say. He wasn't a fool. How could he not tell that Nye Tian wasn't making a deal with him? He was helping him. "What, you don't agree?" Nye Tian smiled again and said, "Then I'll be leaving." "Brother Nye, you..." Tong Dakian immediately stopped Nye Tian. He felt a little embarrassed and asked, "Why are you helping me?" "It's just a deal." Nye Tian smiled and said, "Helping you is the same as helping myself." He could tell that Tong Dakian wasn't a bad person. Otherwise, Tong Dakian would have been a corpse by now. He was indeed helping Tong Dakian with this deal, and he really wanted to know who was targeting the 5 calamities in the sky. "Brother Tong, take a rest first. We'll set off in half a day." Nye Tian looked at Tong Dakian, who was still in a daze, and said with a faint smile. Tong Dakian was stunned and felt that it was a little unbelievable. Half a day later, Nye Tian and Tong Dakian had rested enough and stood up one after another. "Brother Nye, your martial physique is the most powerful I've ever seen among warriors of the same level." Tong Dakian looked at Nye Tian and couldn't help but exclaim. He couldn't believe that in just half a day, Nye Tian had completely recovered. As for Tong Dakian, even with his battle aura bloodline, he had only recovered 70 to 80%. However, this was also because his injuries were far more serious than Nye Tian's. "Your battle aura bloodline is also very powerful." Nye Tian laughed. His face was calm, but his heart was filled with shock. Tong Dakian relied on his battle aura bloodline to recover 70 to 80% in half a day. It was really amazing. Bloodline aura bloodline is comparable to, or even stronger than, the 9 great primordial bloodlines. Of course it's terrifying. Fat Cat laughed awkwardly and didn't say anything else. Nye Tian really wanted to know what kind of power aura bloodline was, but Fat Cat didn't seem interested in explaining. Then, Nye Tian and Tong Dakian didn't delay and immediately left for Demon Wind City. The person who kidnapped Tong Dakian's sister was in Demon Wind City. Nye Tian and Tong Dakian left. In the yellow sand that filled the sky, the original sword pagoda in the sky was left in ruins. Back then, the Master of the Sky used the sword pagoda in the sky to seal one of the 5 calamities in the sky. Unexpectedly, the Guardian later became a person who killed innocent people in order to cultivate the vast calamity sword essence. It was really sad. Not long after Nye Tian and Tong Dakian left, a short and skinny figure in black appeared in the void. This person looked extremely old. However, his height was similar to that of a 7 or 8-year-old child. His eyes were as cold as ice and emitted a chilling intent. Tong Dakian, that trash, the 5 calamities in the sky was snatched away. The figure in black said gloomily. After a long silence, he said in a cold voice, "And that silver-haired kid, who is he?" He actually merged the 5 calamities in the sky. Chapter 3755. A strange old man-demon wind city, one of the 5 main cities of the 5 underworld world. Outside the huge city gate, there were 2 huge stone sculptures of winged beasts. They were incomparably majestic, like 2 mountains. These were the Demon Wind City's guardian beasts, the Demon Wind Wings. The Demon Wind City was located in a land of thousands of miles of wild sand. According to legend, during an ancient storm, the entire Demon Wind City was in danger of being destroyed by the sandstorm. It was a group of Demon Wind Wings that appeared and protected the Demon Wind City from the impact of the sandstorm. After that, the Demon Wind Wings became the guardian beast of the city. Now, the Demon Wind Wings were tamed by beast tamers. Apart from being a flying mount, they were also ferocious fighting beasts. A normal adult Demon Wind Wing could fight against a human Peak Saint Master. At this moment, 2 figures appeared outside the Demon Wind City. They stepped on the sand and arrived outside the city gate. These 2 figures were none other than Nye Tian and Tong Dakian. "Brother Nye, this is the Demon Wind City." Tong Dakian pointed at the huge city in front of him and said, "What a desolate ancient city." Nye Tian smiled and said, "Let's enter the city first." Then, the 2 entered the Demon Wind City. After entering the city, Nye Tian shook off the sand on his body, making him look much cleaner than before. Most parts of the 5 underworld sacred realm were covered in yellow sand. After traveling for 3 days, Nye Tian and Tong Dakian finally arrived at Demon Wind City, where they could finally take a deep breath. "Brother Tong, you said that you didn't know who kidnapped your sister. You only knew that it was someone from the Colosseum, right?" Nye Tian asked Tong Dakian. "Yes." Tong Dakian nodded and said, "My sister and I got separated in the Colosseum. Then, someone found me and asked me to exchange the sealed sword intent of the sword pagoda in the sky for my sister." "Who told you that?" Nye Tian frowned and asked in a low voice. "I didn't see that person. He was only secretly transmitting his voice to me," Tong Dakian said with a dejected expression. "Voice transmission?" Nye Tian was stunned. He didn't expect things to be so tricky. Back in the sky sword pagoda, he had witnessed Tong Dakian's amazing perception. That person was able to send a voice transmission to Tong Dakian and still not let Tong Dakian find him. It could be seen how powerful his concealment ability was. "That person said that he wants me to go to the beast arena to look for him after I obtain the sword intent. He will naturally appear at that time," Tong Dakian said solemnly, unable to conceal the worry on his face. If he were to find out who had kidnapped his sister, he would never let that person off. "All right, let's go to the Colosseum," Nye Tian nodded slightly and said solemnly. However, he had a strange expression on his face. Vaguely, he felt like he was being followed by someone, but he couldn't sense that person's aura at all. It was just a kind of intuition that made him feel like there was a pair of eyes in the dark, constantly staring at him. After a moment, Nye Tian and Tong Dakian arrived outside the Colosseum. After paying the entrance fee, they directly entered. As soon as they entered the Colosseum, Nye Tian heard a tsunami of cheers. The colossal Colosseum was filled with spectators, and they were all shouting and cheering. In the nature of martial artists, they seemed to be brave and ruthless. They liked to watch this kind of exciting fight scene. Nye Tian and Tong Dakian didn't pay attention to the situation in the Colosseum. They just wandered around the huge venue. But after wandering for a long time, nothing unusual happened. The person who contacted Tong Dakian didn't appear. Could it be that that person knows that I didn't bring back the sword intent? Tong Dakian had a puzzled look and couldn't help muttering, "I am the sword intent." Nie Tian smiled faintly, his eyes flickering with a strange light. Following that, they wandered around the Colosseum for a long time, but still nothing happened. Could it be that they took my sister? Tong Dakian couldn't help but feel a little anxious. Suddenly, he thought of something and beads of sweat seeped out of his forehead. Don't let your imagination run wild. Before seeing the sword intent, they won't kill anyone, Nie Tian said solemnly as he placed a hand on Tong Dakian's shoulder. Right. Tong Dakian heard Nie Tian's words and immediately calmed down a lot, nodding his head repeatedly. Look, someone is coming. At this moment, Nie Tian looked ahead and smiled faintly. Huh! Tong Dakian was startled. He immediately saw an old man with a strange figure appear in the distance and walk straight toward them. This old man looked very old and wrinkled, but he was only the height of a 7- or 8-year-old child. Furthermore, he was very thin, looking like a small monkey. The way he walked was very comical, making people feel like laughing. Behind this old man were 2 ferocious-looking black-clothed cultivators. You too, I is the Colosseum's Deacon Wujio. At this moment, the strange old man walked over and nodded at Nie Tian and Tong Dakian with a smile, appearing very courteous. Lord Deacon, what can I do for you? Nie Tian looked at Wujio and asked with a faint smile. I saw that the 2 of you have been walking around the Colosseum for a long time, but you don't seem to have any interest in the beast fights, Wujio said with a smile. So what? Nie Tian also smiled and asked, do we have to come to the Colosseum to watch the beast fights? Wujio's cold and sharp eyes swept over Nie Tian, then he laughed and said, I was right, you 2 are here to participate in the beast warrior fights. Beast warrior fights? Tong Dakian was stunned for a moment, but he immediately reacted. He waved his hands and said, Lord Deacon, you have misunderstood. We are not here to participate in the beast warrior fights, we are just here to watch. Is that so? The corners of Wujio's mouth twitched as he looked coldly at Nie Tian. Lord Deacon has a good eye, we are here to participate in the beast warrior fights, Nie Tian said with a smile and a nod. Brother Nie, this. Tong Dakian could not help but be stunned as he looked at Nie Tian, unable to react for a long time. The so-called beast warrior fights was a battle between holy beasts and warriors. Sometimes, a battle between holy beasts would not attract people's interest, so they would have a beast warrior fight. However, Tong Dakian and Nie Tian were here to look for someone. Now that they had not found the person, they had to participate in the beast warrior fights. What was this? The 2 of you, please wait here for a moment. I will go and make arrangements for the 2 of you. I will be back soon, Wujio said with a smile. After saying that, he turned around and left, leaving the 2 warriors behind. Brother Nie, you. Tong Dakian looked helpless and could not help but look at Nie Tian. He secretly transmitted his voice to him, but he did not know what to say. Brother Tong, did you sense any aura from that old man? Nie Tian asked with a faint smile. No. Tong Dakian immediately came to his senses after being reminded by Nie Tian. He was stunned for a moment and shook his head. That old man is either an ordinary person or someone who is very good at hiding his aura. Nie Tian smiled faintly and continued, he is obviously not an ordinary person, so he is very good at hiding his aura. I'm afraid there are not many people who can hide their aura in front of you, Brother Tong. The person who secretly transmitted his voice to you is one of them. Chapter 3756. The Battle of the Beast Warriors. Tong Dakian instantly understood Nie Tian's words. His face froze in shock as he stood rooted to the spot for a long time. He began to try his best to recall the voice that had secretly transmitted to him in the beast fighting arena that day. However, he did not find anything suspicious. The person who transmitted the voice must have used some method to change his voice. Brother Nie, you mean to say that the little old man just now is the person we are looking for, right? Tong Dakian's eyes darkened, and he could not help but look at Nye Tian. The shock in his heart was written all over his face. Yes. Nye Tian nodded slightly, but he was very calm and collected. Then what do we do now? Tong Dakian's eyes suddenly widened as he asked Nye Tian. Don't be nervous. Act according to the situation. Nye Tian smiled faintly and patted Tong Dakian's shoulder. Let's see what this little old man is up to first. Yes. Tong Dakian nodded heavily. At this moment, he was very impressed with Nye Tian. He did not expect that Nye Tian was not only extremely talented in martial arts, but his observation and intelligence were also so terrifying. He had only said a few words to Nye Tian and the latter had actually contacted the old man. It was really not simple. Sorry for the wait. After a while, the short and skinny old man, Wu Jiu, returned and said with a faint smile, "Follow I." Tong Dakian's eyes narrowed slightly, and he could not help but look at Nye Tian. The latter nodded and he then walked towards Wu Jiu. Then, under Wu Jiu's lead, Nye Tian and Tong Dakian came to a remote area of the beast fighting arena. A beast fighting arena that was far larger than an ordinary beast fighting arena appeared in front of them. And this huge beast fighting arena was filled with a sea of people. The crowd was noisy and it was unusually lively. Nye Tian looked around and saw that in the beast fighting arena, a martial artist was fighting with a giant blood-colored beast. The scene was bloody and tragic. Gentlemen, this is our beast martial field. Wu Jiu brought Nye Tian and Tong Dakian to a special viewing area in the beast martial arena and pointed downwards. Just as he finished speaking, a miserable howl rang out from the beast martial field. The giant beast swatted down with its paw and sent the cultivator flying. The cultivator crashed heavily into the stone wall of the beast martial field and died on the spot. Alright. Good. Alright. The bloody scene did not cause the crowd to panic. Instead, they became excited and started shouting like a tsunami. When Nye Tian saw this scene, he could not help but frown. His face was a little gloomy. Tong Dakian was stunned and seemed to want to say something. Without waiting for Tong Dakian to speak, Wu Jiu's eyes flickered as he swept his gaze over Nye Tian and Tong Dakian. The corner of Nye Tian's mouth twitched as he asked with a faint smile, "Lord Deacon, do you want us to fight that Saint Beast?" "Yes." Wu Jiu did not explain further and just nodded. "I'll go first." At this moment, Tong Dakian stepped forward and was ready to go. "Brother Tong, let me do it." But at this moment, Nye Tian reached out and stopped him. He smiled strangely and glanced at Wu Jiu. Tong Dakian frowned and instantly understood Nye Tian's meaning. He nodded solemnly. Nye Tian wanted him to keep an eye on Wu Jiu and not let the latter leave his sight. At this moment, Tong Dakian was not too sure if Wu Jiu was the person they were looking for. Although Wu Jiu's aura was indeed well hidden, Tong Dakian did not sense anything unusual from him. Just because Wu Jiu was good at hiding his aura, Tong Dakian could not determine that he was the person who had transmitted his voice to Tong Dakian that day. "Please." Wu Jiu glanced at Nye Tian and smiled faintly. There was a strange smile on his face. It seemed that he also hoped that Nye Tian would go down to the beast martial field. Nye Tian smiled faintly and glanced at Tong Dakian. Then, his figure moved and directly jumped into the beast martial field. Nye Tian's appearance immediately made the crowd liven up. Their eyes trembled and released a fiery light. Another person is coming. This kid really doesn't know what's good for him. He dares to fight with the butcher. He must be looking for death. This is already the butcher's 19th battle. He has never lost. Even a 9th-tier heavenly mandate Saint Master might not be able to kill it. Yes, this kid is only a warrior in the 1st tier of the heavenly mandate realm. He is completely looking for death to come up. The crowd said with fiery eyes. They were obviously looking forward to the scene of Nye Tian being slaughtered. If the sacred beasts of the beast martial field had a good record, the audience would give them nicknames. For example, the giant beast in the beast martial field at this moment was nicknamed the Butcher. The Butcher, is it? Hearing the discussions of the crowd, Nietion's eyes flashed with an incomparably cold light. He sneered and said, "I'd like to see how strong a butcher like you is." Roar. At this moment, the giant beast named the Butcher seemed to understand Nietion's words. With a roar, its huge body leaped high in the void. Like a collapsing mountain, it crazily pressed down on Nietion. Nietion's eyes narrowed slightly. He immediately felt the huge pressure coming from above his head. But he wasn't afraid. Instead, a cold smile appeared on his face. After that, the sword will around him was released crazily. The Haotian's sword appeared in the air. In the air, the shadow of the sword was like a waterfall of light, rushing upwards. Everywhere it passed, there was blood everywhere. Bang! Bang! Then, under countless incredulous gazes, 2 pieces of bloody flesh fell to the ground with a loud bang, stirring up a layer of dust. One sword, with just one sword, Nietion directly cut the Butcher into 2 pieces. Everyone was stunned. Their expressions were dull, as if they had lost their minds. They could not react for a long time. They could not believe the scene in front of them. Nietion directly killed the Butcher with one sword. How did this swordsman in the first tier of the heavenly mandate realm do it? The entire beast martial field was dead silent, filled with a kind of depression. Good! After a long time, this depression finally broke out and turned into endless thunderous cheers. What everyone expected to see was the scene of Nietion being directly torn apart by the Butcher. However, the scene of Nietion killing the Butcher with one sword seemed to be more impactful and could make them feel more perversely satisfied. Nietion completely ignored the crowd. Instead, he suddenly raised his head. His eyes were like a pair of sharp blades, locking on Wu Jiu from afar. He said in a loud voice, "Deacon, are you satisfied with my performance?" "Very, very satisfied, of course." Wu Jiu was stunned for a moment before he reacted. He nodded repeatedly and laughed out loud. He said, "Young master's strength is really an eye-opener for I." In fact, back in the sword pagoda in the sky, the hidden man in black was Wu Jiu. Chapter 3757. Mirage Cat. Nietion's strength had exceeded Wu Jiu's expectations. While he was shocked, he was also excited. The stronger Nietion was, the stronger the vast tribulation sword intent in his body was. The vast tribulation sword intent was what Wu Jiu had his eyes on. "Lord Deacon, can I leave the beast martial field now?" Nietion asked loudly with a faint smile. "Young master, since you're already here, why are you in such a hurry?" Wu Jiu's pair of astute eyes flickered as he laughed and said, "Our beast martial field has a rule. For the first time, warriors have to fight at least 3 rounds. 3 rounds? Nietion looked at Wu Jiu from afar and couldn't help but laugh. "Then let's continue." "Good, straightforward." Wu Jiu laughed loudly. Then, he gestured to a black-clad cultivator beside him. The latter nodded and left. Boom. A moment later, a huge explosion sounded out from the beast dojo as a huge stone door appeared from the ground, revealing an underground tunnel. Nietion stared at the underground tunnel and couldn't help but let out a cry of surprise. Roar. At this moment, a deep roar was heard. Then, a huge black figure leaped out from the tunnel and landed heavily on the ground. Nietion's eyes darkened. He looked at the black shadow and his expression changed. It was a huge black cat that was around 100 meters long. It was considered very exquisite among the saint beasts. However, its aura was incomparably sharp. Its fur was black, and there seemed to be a layer of faint black chi circulating around it. Mysterious Mirage Cat. At this moment, everyone's expressions changed when they saw the black cat. They all cried out in shock as unconcealable shock appeared on their faces. No one had expected that Nietion's second opponent would be a Mirage Cat. However, in the next instant, everyone burst into laughter, and their eyes lit up with excitement once again. "Ha ha ha! That kid is dead for sure. To think that he would run into a mysterious mirage cat. Just you wait to be slaughtered. The mysterious mirage cat's body is not large. However, its beast body is extremely powerful. It is comparable to a human sage Monarch Tiani. Furthermore, the mysterious mirage cat's speed is extremely fast. Even an ordinary sage Monarch Tiani would not be able to handle it. Just who in the world is this kid? He's going up against a mysterious mirage cat in the second round. This is truly unfathomable. As the crowd discussed, they looked at Nye Tian with pity in their eyes. As far as they were concerned, Nye Tian was going to die beyond the shadow of a doubt. When Nye Tian heard what the crowd said, he didn't care at all. The corner of his mouth twitched as he looked at the mysterious mirage cat and muttered, "Little cat, it seems like you're quite a troublesome fellow." Roar. At this moment, the mysterious mirage cat was also looking at Nye Tian. It let out a low roar and moved. Suddenly, a black trail appeared in the sky. The mysterious mirage cat's body seemed to have disappeared, leaving only a black shadow. What incredible speed! Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as his expression flickered. Previously, he had heard people say that the mysterious mirage cat was extremely fast. However, he didn't expect it to be so fast. Nye Tian's perception was very strong. In addition to the celestial demon eyes, his perception was much better than ordinary martial artists. However, at this moment, he could only faintly see the mysterious mirage cat's figure. He couldn't see its face at all. Needless to say, the mysterious mirage cat's speed had far exceeded Nye Tian's expectations. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. At this moment, the sound of something tearing through the air could be heard. An extremely sharp chi attacked at an extremely fast speed, like 3 black lightning bolts. Puff, puff, puff. In the next moment, before Nye Tian could react, 3 bloody wounds appeared on his chest. Blood gushed out like a fountain. Nye Tian's face immediately darkened. His whole body seemed to be in a gloomy mood. However, at this moment, the mysterious mirage cat's speed was getting faster and faster. The entire beast fighting ground was covered with several shadows of the mysterious mirage cat. At this moment, Nye Tian finally understood why this little bastard was called the mysterious mirage cat. Kill! Then, Nye Tian decisively attacked. He slashed out with his sword. The sword's shadow was vigorous and surging. However, when it landed, it directly hit nothing. The mysterious mirage cat's speed was too fast. It actually dodged Nye Tian's attack directly. How can this little cat's speed be so fast? Nye Tian's expression changed again. His eyes couldn't help but flicker. Then, he attacked again, but all of his attacks missed. At the same time he attacked, the mysterious mirage cat also attacked. More than 10 bloody wounds appeared on his body. Fortunately, although the mysterious mirage cat's speed was fast, it was not powerful enough. Although it left many wounds on Nye Tian's body, they were not fatal. Nye Tian. At this moment, Nye Tian wanted to attack again. However, he was stopped by the fat cat. The latter said, "The mysterious mirage cat's speed is too fast. It's useless for you to continue attacking." Then what should I do? Nye Tian frowned. In front of a cat, he had become a live target. This beast fighting ground is not big. Carefully observe the mysterious mirage cat's movement trajectory. There is a certain pattern. As long as you can see the pattern, you will be able to predict its position. The fat cat's mouth twitched as it said coldly, "Movement trajectory." Hearing the fat cat's words, Nye Tian's eyes trembled. There was a hint of surprise in them. He carefully observed for a moment. The black trajectory in the sky of the beast fighting ground was indeed following a pattern. His speed was not as fast as the mysterious mirage cat. However, as long as he could predict the mysterious mirage cat's next position and attack in advance, he would definitely be able to kill this little bastard. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. At that moment, another series of frosty lights shot towards Nyetian. However, Nyetian didn't move at all, as if he were a wooden pillar. Then, more bloody wounds appeared on his body. His whole body was covered in blood. Has he given up? Seeing this scene, Wu Jiu could not help but laugh. A sinister smile appeared on his face. This kid is dead. The crowd also laughed as if they were enjoying a feast of slaughter. This is the moment. However, at this moment, Nyetian's figure suddenly moved. He took a step forward and slashed with the sword of sky. The sword's shadow whistled like a dragon and bombarded the void. The crowd's eyes trembled. Their eyes were filled with disdain. As far as they were concerned, Nyetian was simply stabbing his sword at the void, and that was simply insane. Bang! However, in the next moment, a muffled sound was heard. Then, a black shadow flew out and hit the stone wall of the beast fighting ground. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. It's a hit. The corner of Nyetian's mouth twitched. A sinister smile appeared on his face. In the sky above the beast fighting ground, the black shadows disappeared in an instant. This. After a moment, the crowd finally reacted. Their faces were filled with shock. They were completely stunned by the scene in front of them. The mysterious Mirage Cat was killed by Nyetian with a single strike. How did Nyetian do it? The third round. At this moment, Nyetian's body shook. The filthy blood on his body was cleansed. He looked at Wu Jiu coldly and said loudly. Wu Jiu's eyes trembled. He only reacted now. He originally thought that Nyetian would die under the mysterious Mirage Cat's sharp claws. He did not expect that Nyetian would be able to see through the mysterious Mirage Cat's weakness. Demonic edge. Wu Jiu's face was gloomy. His sinister eyes trembled as he shouted loudly. Boom! Just as he finished speaking, a black-robed figure appeared in the sky, standing there coldly like a sharp sword. Chapter 37:58. Chapter 37:53. Chapter 37:53 Demon Edge appears before Nyetian could see the figure high up in the sky. He suddenly felt an inexplicably familiar aura. His expression changed as he looked up. In the sky, a dark and somber figure stood coldly. Dark demonic chi surged all over his body like strange runes. It looked extremely eerie. What was even more eerie was that the figure seemed to be separated from the space-time he was in. It was a little blurry and looked very unclear, let alone the person's face. When Nyetian saw this figure, he couldn't help but be stunned, and his whole body froze for a moment. He felt an inexplicably familiar aura from the other party, but he could not remember who this person was at the moment. It's dark magic edge. At this time, when the crowd saw the dark figure, their eyes suddenly became blazing. They began to shout crazily as if they had fallen into an inexplicable state of obsession. It was obvious that this guy named Demon Edge was very popular in the Beast Dojo. Then, the crowd began to laugh wildly. Ha ha ha, that silver-haired kid is out of luck. He actually went up against Dark Magic Edge. This time, he will definitely die. Yes, Dark Magic Edge is a god of death. He has been in the Beast Dojo for several months and has not lost a single battle. His strength is unfathomable. Most importantly, Dark Magic Edge's opponents were all killed by him with one sword. In hundreds of battles, Dark Magic Edge did not use a second sword against any opponent. No one knows what the limit of his strength is. The crowd discussed with maniacal smiles on their faces. They were extremely excited. Nyetian's appearance had given them a lot of surprises. First, he killed Butcher, then he killed the mystical Mirage Cat, and finally, he actually went up against the great god of death, Demon Edge. At this time, the crowd could not help but wonder who Nyetian was. Why would the Beast Dojo use a trump card like Demon Edge? The people present were not fools. Anyone could see that Wu Jiu was obviously targeting Nyetian. Letting Nyetian fight against a god of death like Demon Edge was simply asking him to die. Demon Edge, make your move. At this moment Wu Jiu's voice rang out. It was deep and cold like thunder, ringing out in Mo Feng's ears. The aura of a hex seal. When Nye Tian heard Wu Jiu's voice, his face sank and he exclaimed inwardly. Wu Jiu's voice contained the power of a curse. It was obvious that the demon edge was being controlled by some kind of curse. Boom! Mo Feng stood where he was like a dark abyss. Then, he suddenly took a step forward. Suddenly, the momentum of heaven and earth sank, as if the world was about to collapse. What a strong aura! Nye Tian's eyes trembled as he exclaimed in his heart. Yi Futian could not perceive the true strength of the demonic edge at all. He could only judge from the latter's aura that this guy should have a cultivation close to the heavenly mandate 9th tier Saint Master. However, his true combat ability was many times stronger than an ordinary heavenly mandate 9th tier Saint Master. Hua! At this moment, the demonic edge opened his palm, and a dark sword appeared in his hand. Suddenly, a cold aura of sword will spread out like a ripple, covering the surroundings in an instant. Crack, crack, crack. In the next moment, wherever the cold sword will passed, the void was directly frozen. Countless ice shards appeared in the air, and the sharp coldness seemed to be able to freeze and crack people's bones. However, as soon as the sword intent swept past Nye Tian, he felt a terrifyingly frigid aura, as if his entire body was being oppressed, causing his expression to flicker. He did not expect the sword will of the demonic edge swordsman to be so terrifying that it could actually cause the most direct pressure on him. Kill! At this moment, the demonic edge swordsman moved, and a cold voice rang out in the void. Then, a dark and cold sword shadow appeared in the air, carrying a bone-chilling coldness, and attacked Nye Tian. In an instant, Nye Tian suddenly felt a bone-chilling murderous aura. Then, this murderous aura instantly turned into a deathly aura, causing his entire face to change. This demonic edge swordsman was too terrifying. The power that exploded in an instant was filled with a terrifying deathly aura, causing people to instantly feel despair. That kid is finished! When the crowd saw this scene, they were shocked, and then their eyes were filled with excitement and passion. In their minds, the scene of Nye Tian being directly killed appeared. It's over. The corner of Wu Jiu's mouth twitched, and he said indifferently. In his opinion, even if Nye Tian had heaven-defying abilities, he would not be able to block the demonic edge swordsman's sword. This! Tong Dakian felt the murderous aura coming from the void. His eyes darkened and his entire body froze. The demonic edge swordsman's sword made him feel despair. 9 limits of the starry sky, destruction of the sun. At this moment, in the beast martial arena, Nye Tian's voice rang out. Then, a majestic sword shadow appeared in the void, and its aura shook the heavens and the earth. With a loud bang, it rushed out like a dragon rushing towards the sun. Boom! In the next moment, the 2 sword shadows collided with a loud bang. The void suddenly stagnated, as if time had stopped in an instant. Boom! 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 Then, an endless amount of violent energy surged, like thousands of raging waves. The heavens and the earth were in chaos, and the entire beast martial arena was instantly drowned in darkness. Nye Tian and the demonic edge swordsman could not be seen at all. The crowd looked at the beast martial arena, and their eyes couldn't help but tremble. They did not expect this to be the result. Wu Jiu frowned and he seemed very surprised. This was the first time he saw an opponent who dared to raise his sword in front of the demonic edge swordsman. When the demonic edge swordsman unsheathed his sword, the oppressive intent in the sword was enough to make the opponent feel despair, and it could instantly destroy the opponent's will. However, Nye Tian was different. He could actually still use his sword to counterattack. It was really strange. After a long time, the space above the beast martial arena gradually returned to normal. After the violent energy dissipated, 2 figures appeared. It was Nye Tian and the demonic edge swordsman. The 2 of them were like 2 strange mountains, standing in the void. One was dark and murderous, and the other was cold and gloomy. He's not dead. When the crowd saw Nye Tion's figure, their eyes trembled, and then they exclaimed. Their faces were filled with disbelief. They could not believe that Nye Tion was not killed by the demonic edge swordsman. He blocked the demonic edge swordsman's sword. Wu Jiu, who was above the beast martial arena, had a pair of cold eyes trembling, and he exclaimed in his heart. The fact that Nye Tion was not killed by the demonic edge swordsman was something that he had never expected. At this moment, he had to admit that he did not have a thorough understanding of Nye Tion's strength. However, the battle in front of him was just the beginning. Would Nye Tion be a match for the demonic edge swordsman? Chapter 3759. Who is it? Huh! Nye Tion felt the demonic aura around Mo Feng. His eyes darkened and he was surprised. At this moment, he felt that Mo Feng's aura was even more familiar. But the strange thing was, he just couldn't remember where he had seen Mo Feng before. Kill! At this moment, Mo Feng uttered the word kill again. His figure, which was covered in demonic aura, immediately moved. The demonic sword in his hand pointed in the air a few times, and then countless sword-intent runes appeared in the air. Almost in an instant, a huge sword formation was formed. Boom! In the next moment, endless black sword lights appeared and swarmed towards Nye Tion like a flock of black crows. Nye Tion's eyes darkened and his expression changed. Mo Feng's strength was too terrifying, and at this moment, Mo Feng's aura was extremely familiar, but he still couldn't remember who the latter was. What a terrifying sword formation! When everyone saw the scene on the beast martial field, their expressions suddenly changed, and they cried out in shock in unison. This was the first time they saw Mo Feng use other move. They didn't expect his aura to be so strong. Who the hell is this devil edge guy? He can actually release such a terrifying sword formation in an instant. Wu Jiu was also shocked by the scene in front of him and couldn't help but say in his heart. Mo Feng came to the beast arena a few months ago, so Wu Jiu didn't know his identity. It was just that the Demon Wind City Lord, Demon Sword, had warned Wu Jiu to protect Mo Feng's safety in secret. Wu Jiu guessed that Mo Feng should have a certain relationship with Demon Sword, but he didn't know the specific relationship. He was very curious why Demon Sword wanted Mo Feng to be a slave. Sword Sealing Forbidden Array, break with one sword. At this time, on the beast arena, Nye Tion stabbed out with his sword. A huge sword formation appeared around his body and rushed over with a loud bang. In the face of Mo Feng's sword formation, he was not afraid at all. Instead, he chose to break the formation with the formation. Boom! Bang bang bang! In the next instant, the two gigantic sword formations clashed together, causing a thunderous sound to ring out in the air. After that, a boundless amount of energy erupted outwards, causing waves of energy to surge up into the skies, incomparably devastating. Mo Feng's sword formation was very strong, but Nye Tion's sword formation was not weak either. The clash between the two sword formations was more like a direct clash between the two sword intents. Bang! A moment later, a deafening explosion was heard. Nye Tion and Mo Feng's figures retreated at the same time to the edge of the beast martial arena. Nye Tion steadied himself. A trace of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth, and his face was slightly pale. Fortunately, he had the soul of the sky and had just merged with the vast calamity sword will. Otherwise, he would definitely be killed by the devil edge. The strength of the demonic edge's sword essence far exceeded his expectations. Especially that dark and sharp aura, it was truly terrifying. On the other side, Mo Feng steadied himself. His body that was hidden in the darkness seemed to tremble slightly as if he was injured. How could this be? Everyone's eyes trembled as they looked at the two figures on the beast martial arena in horror. The shock in their hearts was indescribable. Their shock mainly came from Nye Tion. Indeed, Mo Feng's sword power had surprised them, but it was far from the surprise that Nie Tian had brought them. Originally, everyone thought that Nie Tian would be killed in one stroke, just like Mo Feng's other opponents. However, who would have thought that Nie Tian would be able to hold on until now, and not be at a disadvantage at all? At this moment, they finally understood that the silver-haired swordsman in front of them was far more terrifying than they had imagined. I didn't expect Nie Tian to be able to fight with Mo Feng to this extent. Wu Jiu's face was gloomy, and his eyes were incomparably sinister, as if he wanted to devour someone. At this moment, in the beast martial arena, Nie Tian looked at Mo Feng from afar. His eyes darkened slightly as he asked, "Who exactly are you? Kill." However, Mo Feng did not seem to understand Nie Tian's words at all. He spoke again in a low voice, and it was still the same cold word "kill." Then, his figure moved again, like a ray of black light, directly attacking Nie Tian. Nie Tian's eyes trembled, and he suddenly felt a bone-chilling coldness that made his entire body instantly turn cold, as if he was about to be frozen. At this moment, the dark sword shadow fell with extreme sharpness, and the surrounding void was filled with a realistic aura of death. Nie Tian reacted quickly, and the sky sword stabbed out, forcefully blocking Mo Feng's sword shadow. Bang! However, his figure was forced to retreat again. Suddenly, the stone wall behind him suddenly sank and collapsed. Not only was Mo Feng's sword essence dark and cold, but it was also vigorous and sharp. The aura was incomparably violent, and it had a strong suppressive force. Even Nie Tian, who had integrated with the vast calamity sword will, could clearly feel that his sword will was greatly suppressed by Mo Feng. Then, the two figures were like two sharp swords, exchanging more than a dozen blows in the void. The entire sky above the beast martial arena was filled with sword shadows and saber lights. Airwaves rushed into the sky, and the violent roars never stopped. Everyone was shocked, completely stunned by the scene in front of them. They did not expect Nie Tian and Mo Feng to fight to this extent. In particular, the strength displayed by Nie Tian was too terrifying. It was unbelievable that he only had the cultivation of the first level of the heavenly mandate realm. How can this kid who integrated with the vast calamity sword will be so strong? Wu Jiu's face was extremely gloomy. Nie Tian really made him feel more and more shocked. Boom! At this moment, the demonic aura on Mo Feng's body suddenly skyrocketed. Waves of demonic aura rushed into the sky like boiling magma, extremely violent. That kind of terrifying aura seemed to be able to devour everything. This aura, could it be that you are? Nie Tian sensed the aura on Mo Feng and suddenly felt something, and his face changed. Boom! But at this moment, Mo Feng slashed out with his sword. A dark sword shadow appeared, surging with a sharp cold aura. It was extremely murderous, as if it was going to freeze the world. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly, and the sky sword directly struck out. Boom! In the next moment, the two sword shadows collided with a loud bang, and the world trembled. Then, the terrifying power began to explode, spreading wildly in the void. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In the space, all kinds of sword will collided with each other, and the world fell into chaos. The raging aura and the strangling aura filled the entire beast martial arena. Nie Tian's face was gloomy, and his figure retreated for thousands of meters before he managed to stabilize himself. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, and his face became even paler. But his eyes were filled with excitement as he stared at Mo Feng on the other side.